Hello. Welcome. It's another day, another stream in fascist America. Oh. Okay, here we go. I did do notifications today, updated the title for the stream. I seem to be having things somewhat in order. That's a win, I guess. Welcome to whatever this is, an attempt at providing education, advocacy, and a little common sense in this digital wasteland. I'm Aubri Devashrayee. Today we're going to continue talking about things that are happening in the global news, and we will get into more of what has been happening nationally. So there are a few things that may be like a couple days old, maybe even more than that, but since I haven't covered it yet, I still want to be able to talk about it. And that includes both the world news and national news. And then we're going to get into more of a background on Marxism, and then also read the Communist Manifesto. We are to Section 2, Proletarians and Communists. So things are heating up. We got a background on setting the scene. I guess that's the same thing as a background. It was setting the scene and for this larger conversation about what it actually means to be engaging in communism. So many country names in the title. Is this clickbait? I guess I hadn't thought about it that way. Maybe. It could be considered that. I will be talking about these things, but I'll leave that up to you. Perhaps it is more clickbait if I'm skimming over it. Although, I did have some of them in the title for yesterday's stream, and we didn't get around to talking about a lot of the events that are happening in these countries just because we got chatting about issues of nationalism and what that actually means in politics, if that's good or bad, which it's both. Mostly not great, in my opinion, but hello, Seventh Vixen. How are you? Welcome. So today, I wanted to once again watch this episode, the second episode of the second season of this satirical podcast by The Onion, which is called A Very Fatal Murder, as if there are any other kinds of murders. And so far, it already has been a treat. I mean, the previous season was really great as well, and I'm excited to get into this. Also, this is like a follow-up from last week. Irreversible murder? What? The permanent kind, you mean? How could this be? What a unique phenomenon. There are a number of things that I was talking about that were more adult last week, and I have some follow-up that I won't be going over today just so that I can get to everything, because I'm trying to be better about actually planning in a timely manner. But I do think I will go over some of this stuff on Thursday. So that is for an 18 and up audience, just as a warning. I'll also put that in the title and have those designations set for the stream anyway, but trying to get more education out there. I'm here just because it says Lebanon, but when I hear Lebanon, I really hear the Levantine snails farms that the Tyrians used to make the most delicate purple dye, even in the time of the Romans. Yes, exactly. That was like one of the primary ways to be making the color purple, especially in the Western world. Nothing more adult than squishing snails to make dye. I'm not saying the name just in case. I get you. I understand. I know what you're meaning. Exactly. As you're saying the intelligence agency, is that any better or is that any worse? It's probably, I mean, they're the same. It's all the same. So, I get you. Yeah. We're all running a risk in being surveilled and targeted, which we already are being surveilled, so it is what it is. Yeah, exactly. How about we actually respect civilizations and cultures that have been around for a very long time? I hope they heard me. I know. Exactly. Like, and that is also the point, is that it's part of this larger ethnic cleansing campaign, which is something that I want to be talking about. That they actually brought up on Democracy Now! And I was like, okay, so maybe it worked out that we didn't talk about some of this yesterday, because they actually brought on an expert, a historian, that has a lot more knowledge about these things than I do. So hopefully that will be engaging, and there's plenty to talk about there. Okay, so let's get into the humorous viewing for today. Episode 2 of A Very Fatal Murder. Everything you think you know and why you should forget it. I love this, all of these naming conventions that they use. I guess it's not really a convention, but like the creativity that they use for the titles of these episodes. But this particular type of naming convention of like everything you think you know and why it's wrong, that is such a, like, as we're talking about clickbait, a very clickbaity type of technique that is used on YouTube. Not to say that there can't be like helpful or beneficial or educational type of content that uses this, but it really is used a lot. And I just love that they're calling this out. This is how you know that, like, obviously The Onion is like a satirical publication, but they have a lot of like writer jokes in there. And like, as a writing nerd, literature nerd, I enjoy this greatly. There's some stuff for everyone. All right, let's get into it. A Very Fatal Murder. Why could you do it, Armand? Like in the Scarlet Pimpernel. How I couldn't when she was looking at you like dinner, my love. Exactly. Yeah. And it's so funny that you were calling that out too in the Scarlet Pimpernel, because like how they were even talking about each other was very incestuous, but that's another indicator of just aristocracy, and how, like, we were talking most recently when reading the Communist Manifesto, that like we have gone back to feudalism and aristocracy. There was, I think, kind of this illusion that we had thrown this over. I mean, particularly like according to Marx, but I don't know if that's ever really left the aristocracy. And I mean, I know he's saying that's like majority rule and such, but yeah, incestuousness, selfishness, delusional concepts of grandeur, these are hallmarks of the aristocracy. So is it any wonder that the Scarlet Pimpernel, as aristocratic propaganda, had a lot of really weird messaging with siblings? No, this is par for the course. All right, let's see what this episode has in store for us today.
Released dozens of text messages detailing the fractious relationship between Milo Reed and his wife, Liana.
The security camera footage, the eyewitnesses, the DNA. The guy is overwhelmingly guilty. Milo Reed killed his wife.
At this time, we're asking anyone with information about Liana Choi Reed's murder to please not come forward. We have way too much evidence as it is, and we're having a hard time keeping track of it all.
The Milo Reed story was getting nonstop media.
Oh, that's amazing. If anyone knows anything, please stop. That is so funny. But that might as well be what cops are saying anyway. Like, as if they're going to do shit. And as if they're actually going to try to get justice in, like, the truest form of whatever that means. Like, actually having accountability and responsibility for things. Amazing.
Around the clock. It was hard to go anywhere without hearing the public dissect Liana's tragic demise and Milo's apparent guilt.
Oh yeah, that dude's going to jail for life.
I hope so.
Wait, who's that freak over there recording us?
Whoa, that's the guy who made the computer that murdered Ellie.
To the public and to me, Liana's death sounded like an open and shut case. Milo opened his evil side and shut Liana's life. But if I had learned anything from my time as an award-nominated journalist and a decade as the police...
Just all the stupid metaphors. This is how you know it's like writers really entertaining themselves and therefore entertaining us, but like using all of these like stupid types of like turns of phrase that many people use in this type of content. It's amazing.
Chief of a small town, it was that when a corrupt criminal justice system is involved, nothing is ever really open and shut.
Order in
Well,
the court.
that is true.
I absolutely did not kill my wife.
If he was gonna strangle her, he would have done it like a real man, with his hands.
A man once called the next
Jesus.
Einstein may be the next Einstein of killing his wife.
Ugh. It's so
We hear a
dumb.
lot about the long arm of the law, but nobody ever talks about the legal system's other body parts. Judges are the head. Lawyers are probably the lungs or the nervous system or something important like that. The police are definitely the legs because they hold everything up and also kick a lot of people in the face. And it's here at the Clara Shortridge Foltz Criminal Justice Center in downtown Los Angeles.
I also kick a lot of people in the face, also step on people, kneel on people. You know, they are known to be doing this for years and years and years. Since the police state has existed, which in the US, you know, it has largely been militias and slave catchers. So there you go. Just using them all wrong, making no sense. Exactly. Or just like thinking like they're going to set it up to be like a profound moment and then it ends up just being incredibly dumb is just genius. Because like it takes a smart person to like set it up in that way, to like recognize these patterns that are overused and then set it up in a way that's just like completely nonsensical. Love. Welcome. How are you doing?
That we find the legal system's beating heart, trying to pump out justice, but backed up by the blood clots of ignorance, bureaucracy, racism, and corruption. My goal this season is to provide unfettered access to this trial, and by extension, to this entire system. In that sense, I'm the legal system's bones, running through every part of the body, quietly observing. You know what they say, you can't hide anything from the bones. But I'm also the only person who can diagnose what's wrong with the body and find a way to fix it. So maybe I'm more like the doctor. I don't know. Both are good. Am I the doctor or the bones?
I did not kill my wife. For me to be accused of such a heinous act is a national tragedy. Liana's murder was horrible, and I'm determined to find whoever did this to me and clear my name.
The man speaking is Milo Reed, just before his arraignment. 3 days earlier, on a clear, sunny Los Angeles day, he was pulled off a chandelier in his aviary, held for 14 hours while he came down from an ayahuasca trip, and arrested for murder. Milo is the wealthy and influential CEO.
So I was saying that this is such class bullshit, like upper class bourgeois bullshit, aristocratic bullshit of he was on his chandelier in his aviary. Man.
Of Terrain, a self-professed self-made billionaire, he was one of the original brains behind Now Talk. You might remember Now Talk as a revolutionary social network, where users could record and send 15-second audio clips directly between each other's phones. It was a huge hit among college students, urban 20-somethings, and meth dealers from the summer of 2009 up until the late summer of 2009.
Meth dealers.
In fact, I broke up with my first serious girlfriend using Now Talk. The app was back in the news during the 2016 election when it came out that the Russians had been using it to spread fake news via 15-second audio clips. Everything from this...
I'm President Barack Obama, and I'm voting for Donald Trump.
...to this.
And it's your father. Call me. Your mother is very sick. And the doctor says the only cure is voting for Donald Trump.
But Milo was barely touched by the scandal, because in 2010, he cashed out and sold Now Talk to Bing Bong. A year later, he launched
that voice,
Terrain.
too.
With Terrain, we will revolutionize the housing industry and fight against environmental destruction. We are going to change the world.
How are they going to do that? By building new green housing over top the Pacific Ocean, or so they said. Today, Terrain employs about 45,000 people working around the clock, but as of this recording, has not finished a single house. They have, however, completed a foundation for their structure, pouring tons of cement into the East China Sea.
The
Despite
only
Terrain's
cure,
recent struggles,
damn,
Milo is still
you put it
considered a
that way.
pioneer and visionary in Silicon Valley.
Means
or
you
at least
have
he was, until this. And by this, I mean the murder.
Okay, so my personal assistant Sydney and I are currently in the security line outside the courtroom. Because the justice system lacks transparency, I'm being forced to sneak in my recorder, headset, and boom mic underneath this ankle-length parka. Sydney's wearing one too, so I don't stand out.
Oh my god, it's so hot.
Sir, if you would please remove your coat for inspection.
Oh, fuck.
Yeah, didn't think about that, did ya?
No!
Save the boom.
Those are all hers?
Sir, this is a public hearing. You're allowed to bring recording equipment in. All those guys did.
The guard showed me to the podcaster's box of courtroom 9C.
As we
I'd
waited for
rather
Milo
just
to
die.
appear,
I know.
say
I
the
think we
evidence
all
speaks for
should
itself.
have that
line the gallery
mindset.
like the pews
of a church.
Looked like I wasn't the only one out for access. This might be tougher than I thought.
Mr. Reed, do you understand the charges brought against you today?
That's Judge Yana Nazarian, presenting Milo with the terms of his indictment. The word judge, that's courtroom jargon for the person who judges things. Watching the proceedings, I quickly learned that the court system is filled with confounding phrases, procedures, and obscure
Jargon.
titles designed to make it impenetrable to the average person.
No, I don't understand the charges, Your Honor. These charges make no sense. You can't charge an idea. You can't arrest a dream.
All right, bail is set at $500,000.
You probably didn't understand any of that. Bail, charges, dollars. It was hard to keep up with all the legal mumbo-jumbo flying around. But like any good reporter, I decided to dig
Much
deeper
needed
into what it meant.
explanation. I know.
Excuse me? Could
Thank you.
elaborate on that?
Also,
How does
using
bail work?
the word
Order,
in the
quiet in the courtroom
definition
during
of
these
judge
proceedings.
is
I was silenced and asked to sit down.
amazing.
Apparently interrogating the system was frowned upon. But I had so many more questions. What was that thing Judge Nazarian was banging, for example? But now wasn't the time to find answers. The arraignment continued.
Your Honor, we request our
Damn,
client be
guess you'll
granted
never
house
know
arrest
it's a
as
gavel.
condition of posting bail. He is clearly not a flight risk, as all of his jetpacks were confiscated by the police as evidence.
As I'm sure you know, that voice belongs to Ken Whitten, Milo's lead defense attorney. He's a veteran lawyer who recently made a name for himself after...
This is, oh, P.S., just as a catch up for what I'm doing. I'm making a bracelet for Tan, frequent viewer, chatter, also subscriber, and this is something I'm offering to subscribers on Twitch and Patreon, that you can pick colors that you like, and I will make you a bracelet. So, kind of cheesy, but I like to think of it as a little bit sweet. So that's what's happening here, just for context.
successfully defending a high school senior who was accused of sexual assault by all 172 girls and 5 of the teachers at his prep school. He's known for defending monsters, and at first glance, this case seemed no different.
Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Reed is clearly a dangerous and unstable individual.
The woman speaking there, of course, is Rosa Watts, Deputy District Attorney and prosecutor for the state. She's been leading the media charge against Milo, characterizing him as an entitled and erratic head case. Now's as good a time as any to add that I'm very supportive of women in positions of power, and I know they can do anything just as well as a man, if not better.
I would never harm someone who wasn't employed by me.
Just like these constant insertions that like are not necessary, of like, by the way, I think women are humans too. It's like, no one asked you. It's concerning that you feel the need to keep saying this, but sadly, this kind of behavior is not really that uncommon, and not just having to do with women, but really any forms of bigotry.
to anyone, Your Honor.
Exactly. My wife is already dead. Who would I even kill?
The state would like to remind the court that Mr. Reed has already made multiple threats
Great
against
excuse.
witnesses, police officers, and myself, and that's just today.
The prosecution had plenty of evidence that made Milo look very bad. Several eyewitnesses positively ID'd Milo fleeing the scene, including one of his contract employees, Michael Fernari, who had been delivering a rare Atlantic white-spotted octopus for Milo's personal aquarium that morning.
Michael, did Milo kill Liana?
It was Milo. I saw him. I really can't say any more at this time.
Watts and her team had also released security camera footage of Milo entering the servants district of his compound that morning.
Uh-oh,
which is
is
where
that guy
Liana's
gonna
body
be
was
safe?
found. And chemical analysis proved that Milo
Needs
had been
to
high
be
on
in
a
the witness
powerful
protection
custom
program.
drug cocktail, a mix of psychedelic mushrooms, cocaine, and anthrax at the time of the murder. The state's official story, and I should warn you, it's a bit graphic, is that the night of Liana's death, the couple got into a heated argument. She stormed off, telling an employee that she was headed out to clear her head and get some space from her husband. And that was the last time she was seen, unmurdered.
Later that night, after erratically driving his go-kart down the hallway and crashing into a priceless Gauguin sculpture, the defendant stumbled out of the husband's wing of the mansion and asked a security droid to locate Liana using his estate's facial recognition.
They have their own wings. The husband's wing. The thing is like, they do such good social commentary that people often say with The Onion, or like, oh, glad that The Onion is a more reliable source of news than so-called news outlets. That's just real. That situation.
Software. He then found her outside a bar in the servants' district of the compound.
Nothing too unusual so far, but that's when the prosecution says Milo flew into a fit of rage, descended into his lab, and activated one of his experimental VR strangulation drones. One murder later, Milo dragged Liana's body to a nearby laundry room, where he spat on her corpse before fleeing the scene. But Milo denied it all,
God.
and provided his alibi.
I was with my mistress
Can't forget
the whole
that
night.
detail.
I remember it clearly.
The prosecution seemed to have an airtight case, but as a wealthy, powerful white man, it was going to take a lot more than some witnesses and DNA to convict Milo Reed.
Well,
that's the sound of one of Milo's strangulation drones in a demo video on YouTube. But it's not the strangulation drone allegedly used to kill Liana. We might never know
just
what that
made the
drone
video,
sounds like,
probably.
because the police haven't been able to locate it. As of this recording, the murder weapon is still missing.
is he going to become part of the police department again?
Hey,
in this
AVFMers,
season?
have you ever wondered what it would be like to talk to a lion? What about an elephant?
Wild
now you can,
cranberries?
thanks to Safari Science and their incredible new Animal Translator app. All you've got to do is download it, talk into it, hello, and listen to the 100% accurate animal translation. So what are you waiting for? Download Safari Science today. You'll love it. Or should I say, you'll... it. Let's try something. I want you to think about everything you know about the Milo Reed
What else
case.
is there
Or should
past
I say,
convictions?
everything you think you know.
I know, like witnesses.
Forget
and
every
DNA.
detail you've heard on
Exactly.
the news.
Just showing
every
that,
detail
like,
you've heard on this podcast, and
the
everything
most
you knew about
reliable
Milo and
types
Liana
of
beforehand.
ways to convict
Forget
people
about their
don't.
companies, their charities, their scandals.
Which honestly
Have you
is
done
not that
Good.
untrue.
Now forget some more. Forget about what companies and charities even are. Forget about other murders. Forget about death. Forget history and math and books.
What?
Now forget what you're doing tomorrow and what you did yesterday. Live in the moment. Smile. Your favorite song, or I should say what you thought was your favorite song. Forget the lyrics, the way it
What?
sounds, the way it makes you feel. What are you thinking about right now? Forget that too. Forget about me. I know that won't be easy, but try. What are you left with? Basic language skills, sure. Now forget those. What do you have?
Uh-oh.
Goo goo gaga, I love my mommy. I'm hungry, daddy. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. To be truly objective,
was
a reporter
stupid.
like me has to strip things down to basics. I need to shed my preconceived notions and build things back up from scratch. So I did that, and as I reintroduced myself to the facts of the case one by one, the victim, the suspect, the evidence, the picture that started to form in my head was essentially the same as what I'd heard in the media. Yeah, this guy seems very guilty, but I'm still glad I did that mental exercise, aren't you? And it wasn't just the overwhelming evidence that made Milo Reed
What
seem
is
guilty
happening?
of the murder. He wasn't.
I know. So the name of this episode is Everything You Think You Know and Why You Should Forget It, which is, yeah, goo goo gaga, mama. Like, just playing off of that same like stupid trope that so many people do with like clickbait of like take everything you know and then forget it and then understand this, and trying to say something profound, and it's like just going and there's no payoff.
Helping himself much with his own explanations of what happened. He'd done just one TV interview, and it was a disaster.
We're back with embattled Silicon Valley entrepreneur Milo Reed, who so far during this interview tweeted out, "I'll strangle you next," to a man who criticized him online, yet has refused to answer a single question about the trove of evidence connecting him to the murder of his wife, Liana.
I'm the victim of a blind mob. The police, they have the gall to tell me my DNA was found at the scene. Of course it was. I'm everywhere. I've traveled to the farthest reaches of the mind, the earth, and the universe. These people attacking me? They are terrified of the new world I'm unleashing on the world. Seriously, why did I even bother donating $500,000 to the governor's re-election campaign if he was going to let something like this happen to me?
Since then, Milo stopped talking to the media. Even though the temperature is warmer than New York and Bluff Springs, Los Angeles can be a cold place sometimes. The air conditioning in the boutiques, the crisp taste of an iced matcha tea, the icy look on a development exec's face as she tells you your screenplay isn't what they're looking for. But nothing felt colder than the heat of the California sun as I came to on the sidewalk. I had been ejected from the Fultz Criminal Justice Center for the so-called crime of trying to grab a bailiff's gun.
Also, the fact that
podcasting is an auditory
that
medium,
dude was
so hearing the
threatening
gun
to
would have painted the
strangle
perfect
someone
picture of
else.
the courtroom.
Just
And plus, I
admitting
used to
it,
be a cop,
like
so it
that's
was
a
all good.
confession, essentially.
Nobody cared about that. I had been put on ice by a cruel and quick to
But
condemn
still,
justice system, and it stung.
we'll see if
like
he
an
actually
icicle stab
has
to the
any
heart.
sort of consequences.
Lying prone on the sidewalk as the blood rushed back into my head, I found myself staring directly into that cold sun, thinking about what I had witnessed during Milo's arraignment. What was the real story here? A judge going easy on a tech tycoon because of his connections in the governor's mansion? Another guilty man abusing the system and getting off easy because of his power and influence? Maybe it was too early to say. My quest for access in this case had been shot down. I knew what I had to do. It wouldn't be enough to merely observe the inner workings of a courtroom. I had to observe the inner workings of a murderer's mind. But did Milo even have one? Or do psychopaths just have a sack full of blood up there? I had to find out. As the media attention was heating up and as the suspect's legal team discouraged him from talking to reporters, I needed to become the only podcast with an exclusive interview. I had to talk to Milo Reed. Next time on A Very Fatal Murder.
You are receiving a call from Milo Reed Home Penitentiary.
Your Honor, Milo Reed is simply too mentally fit to stand trial.
Yeah, David, your script.
That they have like a call set up. The joke is, because normally when you hear that, like you're calling an inmate and they're like, oh, you're at this particular prison or jail. And it's like he's rich enough to have his own penitentiary on his own property, that it's not even just under house arrest. Also, he's too amazing. Like his mind is so vast, none of us can understand it, that he can't possibly stand trial. What do you mean? Did you ever watch Between the Lions? I loved that show. That show was so fun. This reminds me of a bit from that show. Wait, which bit? I'm trying to remember. Remind me.
It was interesting, but it doesn't really feel like a good fit for us right now.
Hell yeah, I seen that drone come around. It strangled my damn cows.
Hello, David. I've been looking forward to talking to you.
A Very Fatal Murder is brought to you by me, David Pascal, and Onion Public Radio. This episode was brought to you by Cantor's Deli, the NRA, and St. Jude's Dog Hospital, with additional support
The
from
detective
Diane Lane.
one.
Are you a casting director,
Yes.
producer, or director looking for a great actor for a film or TV project?
What a great
Try
show.
Diane Lane. She's a talented
I
and
loved
versatile
that
performer
show
with
so much.
experience in stage and screen who can pretty much do anything. I mean, Under the Tuscan Sun? Come on, people. Don't miss out on your chance
Where
with
the
Diane
detective
Lane.
is
Oh, and by the
banana
way,
is
you can
something.
remember your favorite song now.
Yeah.
Feels good, right?
Reading. It's like listening, but with your eyes. And if you subscribe to The Onion right now, you'll receive 12 monthly issues of our award-winning newspaper to listen to with your very own eyes. Go to
Listen with your own
membership.theonion.com
eyes.
now to hear more.
Listen with your eyes. Okay, so next we have episode 3, The People versus Milo Reed. Gawain's World. I know. Gawain's World. You have much better memory of that show, of like remembering the segments. Mostly I like remember the lions. And also the guy that like that's sounding out words. Yeah, Gawain's Word. What a great show. Okay, shall we get into the headlines? Yeah, where they mash the words together? Yes, exactly. It's so creative. It was genuinely entertaining and educational. Imagine that, actually having these things be together. Of course, this would be defunded. It's a play on Wayne's World. I know. It also is one of these things where it's like it was clever enough and had certain jokes that like parents and adults could watch it and still be entertained while they're with their kids. And then like kids didn't have to get all of those jokes, but there was like something for adults in there too. That's something that my partner and I we have been talking about is like some of these shows now that are geared towards children, that it's like just for kids, it seems a lot of the time, when like in the past there were some things that had to do more with adults. But I think that largely has to do with the fact that there's just like this enormous quantity of content and media and entertainment out there, that it's like you can get hyper focused on things. You don't have to like go to the theater and be like, okay, now we have to also entertain the parents. That there's just like so much media out there that people are like, okay, you can find your own thing if you don't like this. I don't know if that's true, but if you feel that is true as a parent, PBS Kids is still killing it. Yeah, and very tragic in an accident that they have been like stripped of their funding, their federal funding. The good ones are there but can be hard to find. Yeah, where it's like you can get so niche now with all of this content that it's like, I mean, really endless. Bluey is goated. That's what I have heard. I've seen a few episodes, maybe not a few. I think I've seen like 2. But from what I saw, it was very charming. And also, it seems like it is very helpful for parents. Like, it's good for kids to be learning things, but almost like it's geared even more towards parents, which I think is an interesting concept. But it is very cute and like profound, a lot of the things that they talk about. Okay, so this is Democracy Now! With their headlines today. Sometimes I lose track of the days, and not just like in a regular human way, but like with going and like editing or trying to like clip certain things or like post certain things. I always forget what day it is because I am not always doing like posting things in a chronological order besides the VODs and literature story time, like when I'm clipping things. So I'm like all over the place and I'm like, what day is it? What is it? Last week? I don't know. I'd watch that shit on my own. Yeah, that's what I have. Like, I know people who don't have kids that enjoy that show, where they're just like, I feel like just having any sort of like kids in your life, this is really beneficial to learn about, or just like being a human, that it's a very human based show. And like the topics they talk about, like, one of the ones that I saw that at least I remember is the one where they were camping and there was a little French kid, and so they didn't speak the same language, but they're still able to play. And just like this concept of like it's a really good reminder for adults to be like, yeah, we're all human and we can find ways to communicate. It doesn't mean that we have to demonize one another for differences, but rather be like, look, we can still like have a good time if we actually tried. Melissa and I have cried while watching it. Yeah, it's like deeply human despite it being about dogs. It's like it really is great writing. And also I feel like I don't know the background of the show and like all of the research that they do in it, but it seems like they have like a robust team of like therapists, like maybe like childhood family therapists that they're consulting, like studying like childhood development, but also like regulation and like just like how to human. Like they actually consult people who are authorities on how to have like a decent human life. I don't know. That's at least the impression that I get. All right. So let's see what Amy Goodman has to say. I may or may not speed this up, just depending on... I mean, I guess this one isn't too long, but just to make sure that we're getting to some other things, maybe I will speed it up a bit.
Welcome to Democracy Now!, Democracy
I probably
Now.
should have sped up the episode.
I'm Amy Goodman. President Trump
Too
says the United
lost in the
States is nearing
sauce
a
on
peace
that
agreement
one.
with Iran, claiming he's in the final throes of a deal that could be completed within days. It's at least the 37th time since late March Trump has said publicly Iran and the U.S. are closing in on an agreement or that Tehran is eager to reach a deal. Trump's latest claim came after Israel and Iran halted drone and missile attacks against one another following the largest escalation since the so-called ceasefire was declared in April. On Monday, Iran's parliament speaker and top negotiator, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, said Iran is responding to U.S. and Israeli violations.
What caused these tensions was that the Americans committed a blatant violation of the ceasefire, both through the naval blockade against the Iranian nation and by violating the agreement made on Lebanon and the ceasefire. The remarks made by the U.S. president about the Memorandum of Understanding contradicted parts that had been agreed to. This showed that they are seeking neither a ceasefire nor dialogue.
In Lebanon, Israeli forces ordered all residents of the coastal city of Tyre and its surrounding suburbs to flee north of the Zahrani
As you were
River
mentioning,
just hours before it began
Vixen.
heavily bombing the area. 5 people were killed, 8 others injured when Israel struck near a Red Cross center in Tyre. 4 of the wounded were paramedics. The attack also damaged a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Lebanon's health ministry reports Israel's killed more than 3,600 people in Lebanon since March 2nd, including 245 children. More than 900 children have been wounded. In Gaza, Israeli forces have reopened border crossings into the besieged Palestinian territory after closing them Sunday in retaliation for Iranian strikes. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres had urged Israel to immediately reopen the passages, which are the only route for desperately needed humanitarian aid, which Israel severely limits. Meanwhile, Israeli strikes killed at least 7 Palestinians Monday, including a child, as Israel's army pushes the so-called Yellow Line deeper into Gaza. In one attack, an Israeli drone fired at people gathered in Jabalia refugee camp, killing 3. Among the dead, 8-year-old Jad Salman, a young boy whose father Yusuf was seen clutching his son's school bag, saying a final goodbye.
My son is 8 years old. What wrong did he commit? He was leaving his school. He was leaving school. This is his bag with blood on it.
Nigeria's military says it's freed 360 people abducted by Boko Haram in southern Borno in the northeastern part of the country. But villagers in the region say joint U.S.-Nigerian airstrikes killed dozens of civilians during operations in May, when AFRICOM and the Nigerian army claimed they killed 175 so-called terrorists over 3 days. Nigeria is facing a decade-long insurgency in the north, where armed groups have routinely carried out kidnappings for ransom. In California, progressive Los Angeles City Council member Nithya Raman will advance to a November runoff election against incumbent Mayor Karen Bass, who's seeking a second term. A count of mail-in ballots from the June 2nd primary showed Raman surging ahead of former reality TV.
I know people were wanting Steyer to win the billionaire, which now he seems to have more progressive politics, but we cannot ignore the fact that he gained a lot of his wealth from the industrial prison complex and how that is deplorable. And it just shows that we really have shitty choices when it comes to electoralism most of the time, that even though elected politics do in fact affect our material conditions, that it's still like this highlights the importance of having outside pressure constantly to create change. Namaste, Tan. Welcome. Hello, hello. This is Tan's bracelet. So I'm doing just like a quick little preview. I don't know if you can even really see it that well. I'm doing like monochrome. So like going from like black, because I know you wanted black and purple. So going from black to like darker purples to lighter purples, and then adding a little gray in there. So also if you want me to like change anything up, I can do that. But there you go.
Personality Republican Spencer Pratt. This comes as officials continue to count ballots in the race to succeed California Governor Gavin Newsom with more than 80% tallied. Republican Steve Hilton has a slight lead over Democrat Tom Steyer in a close race for second place. One of them will advance to take on former Biden administration Health and Human Services Secretary Javier Becerra in the general election. On Monday, President Trump repeated his
if you end up
claim
not
California's
liking
elections
something,
are rigged.
I'm not
writing on his
offended
Truth Social
by you
platform,
being
quote,
like,
"Not
I
possible
want
for
something
Spencer
different."
Pratt to have lost the LA runoffs after the big lead he had. Third world nation, unquote, Trump wrote. More than half of Los Angeles voters are registered Democrats compared to less than 15% who are Republicans. President Trump formally nominated his former personal lawyer, Todd Blanche, to serve as Attorney General. He would succeed Pam Bondi, whom the president fired in April. The nomination comes just weeks after Blanche used his position at the Justice Department to protect Trump, his family, and his business from any IRS investigation connected to tax returns filed before Trump's controversial $10 billion settlement with the IRS. In a statement, Public Citizen co-president Lisa Gilbert wrote, quote, "This is yet another example of Trump assembling a team of henchmen whose primary qualification is doing his own bidding rather than serving the nation to staff the government. Blanche demonstrated his toady qualities throughout his audition for this role and is being awarded with the leading role as a result." An immigrant from the nation of Georgia.
I love that word choice as well. The toady qualities. It's accurate and also funny. That's not a very like common word that's used these days. The cats are up. Oh, mealtime. Cute. Wait, are they, Tan, remind me, are they siblings or no? I do remember you saying that one of them, that Ghibli, that he is long-haired, right? So maybe. Oh, okay. Siblings indeed. They're so cute. The pictures you sent in the Discord of them. They're so sweet. You've been inspiring me as well to like find more foods that I can like make within reason or like serve to our cats just to like get more variety in their diet. Time does not always allow for this, you know, money as well, but they have been enjoying it. Domestic short hair and long hair. Ghibli is short. Oh, okay. And do you say Ghibli or Ghibli? I know people say both. Until I recently found out that Miyazaki says Ghibli. Anyway.
Has died in an ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement jail. Mamuka Artmeladze is the 50th person to die in ICE custody since Trump returned to office. The 43-year-old had been jailed at the Troubled Wind Correctional Center in Louisiana for about 4 months when he was found unresponsive.
Jubilee.
ICE officials have not disclosed further details about his death. He's the second immigrant to die while detained at Wynn Correctional Center in less than 2 months. The facility is operated by the Wynn Parish Sheriff's Office, and ICE
This is the number that they've reported on, by the way. And instead of actually recognizing that there are many more people, particularly in that detainment center that was colloquially referred to as Alligator Alcatraz, that they have thousands of so-called missing detainees, and there are no efforts to find these people because guess what? We don't know where they are. They're not trying to actually find human lives. That's not the point of all of these things. Ghibli. Oh. Never knew Miyazaki said it that way. Or maybe he says Ghibli. I heard this from someone. Oh. Oh, okay. Ghibli. Oh. Yeah, I did hear this, like, from someone. I didn't, like, actually see a recording of him saying this, so I could be completely wrong. But there we go. Something to do homework on for me.
Contractor LaSalle Corrections. A recent inspection of the ICE jail found excessive use of force by guards, poor medical care, and unsanitary conditions. New Jersey Governor Mikey Sherrill conducted an inspection of the Newark ICE jail known as Delaney Hall Monday after previously being denied entry to the jail, where hundreds of immigrants began a hunger and labor strike in May. Governor Sherrill said her visit was closely controlled and limited, and that she was prohibited from speaking to any of the imprisoned immigrants inside. In a statement, Sherrill said the restrictions during the visit continue to raise, quote, serious questions about the...
Which also, that's kind of a false framing of the situation of, like, not everyone who is in there is actually an immigrant. That is just not the case. There are plenty of citizens, and, I mean, not to say that, like, immigrants can't become citizens, but people who were born here, that it's like, it's never been about immigration.
Real conditions of the facility and the treatment of those held there, unquote. Sherrill has faced criticism after she deployed New Jersey State Police on protesters outside Delaney Hall, which is run by the for-profit private prison company Geo Group. Mutual aid
Yeah, and she
volunteers
should have
of those detained,
criticism
even after
for
facing
that.
harassment from law enforcement. On Monday, educator and YouTube star Ms. Rachel, known to millions of children around the world, paid a visit to the volunteers as well as the children of parents detained at Delaney Hall. She said on her Instagram, quote, met the sweetest children whose hearts are broken. They just want their parents home again, Ms. Rachel said. In related news, President Trump's so-called border czar, Tom Homan, lashed out at Delaney Hall protesters in an interview with Fox News, claiming government surveillance had revealed most of the demonstrators
Yeah, do
are not
what you
from New
need to
Jersey.
do. I hope you
These are
can
protesters. We got facial recognition of people from
get
Portland.
recharged.
They're at Portland riots and many from the Minnesota. This is a well-planned, established thing they're doing.
I know we're
This
also
isn't
talking about
homegrown.
some heavy
In the
things
same
as well.
interview,
So
so-called border czar Tom
take care
Homan
of
also
yourself.
laid out a plan by the Trump administration to deploy a massive surge of federal immigration agents to New York City in retaliation for new legislation recently signed by Governor Kathy Hochul that bans state and local law enforcement
Sending
from
you
collaborating with ICE and enacts other immigration protections.
positive healing
Homan's
energy.
announcement came just days before the start of the World Cup this week, with immigration activists leading campaigns nationwide to protect communities amidst an expected rising presence of ICE agents during the soccer tournament. New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani pushed back against so-called border czar Tom Homan's threats during a press conference with Governor Kathy Hochul Monday, calling for ICE to be abolished and saying, quote, I believe that ICE raids are cruel, they're inhumane, they do nothing to serve in the interest of public safety, the mayor said. Mamdani also responded to the mounting barriers faced by World Cup fans and soccer players from qualifying nations that are on Trump's travel ban and visa restrictions list.
The World Cup is supposed to be a celebration of...
I don't know if he's going to mention this, but I did see very recently that there is a Somali ref that is not, who was going to come for the World Cup, that is not being allowed in because of these restrictions.
the world as a whole, and some of the decisions that we've seen been taken by the federal administration, be it the denial of visas for journalists from certain countries, or the rejection of a visa for a coach of a team, as well as single-day visas for specific foreign national teams. This is anathema to what this tournament is supposed to be about. If we cannot even allow the players, the teams, and the journalists covering those teams,
I think he's done a good job with many policies, but I even think he has like soft pedaled some aspects, like especially with how he previously would be talking about the NYPD, and like how we have to talk about people in the executive branch essentially being like the top cop of, like, when people are running for office, they usually are much softer in their language when discussing law enforcement and how this is a lot of the time a concession to the brutality and police state that we live in rather than a serious way to change it, that they often become part of the issue.
Then it begs a larger question about our commitment to the spirit of this tournament.
A federal judge has ruled against President Trump's $100,000 annual fee on H-1B visa applications, saying it's an unlawful tax. This decision comes days after another federal judge ruled against a Trump administration policy to freeze applications for asylum, green cards, work permits, and other immigration protections for people from 39 countries. And President Trump was loudly booed by basketball fans at Manhattan's Madison.
Yeah, I'm sorry you went through that. You shouldn't have to experience that. But unfortunately, people can be very cruel. Do what you need to do, especially as we're talking about a lot of this stuff. I don't even know what the World Football Cup is doing in America. If it were the female one, still the female team is good. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. It honestly just goes to show, because like this shithead, he got like an award that they made up for him. It just goes to show that like the people who even are in charge of this, the owners of it, that they are part of this class rather than actually being for human beings, because if they were, it would not be in the US most likely. They're good. I will be the first to admit, and I will regularly admit, that I have very little knowledge about sports whatsoever. Yeah, all the soccer high managers are crooks. Yeah, it seems like that's the case in like most places around the world, but especially when it comes to FIFA and how that just is part of this larger type of global capitalism that does not benefit everyone, but only the 1%, the ruling class. But speaking of crooks, and not being for everyone, this was a situation that happened last night at the Knicks game, and apparently with everything that went on, so there was this huge perimeter that was put around Madison Square Garden that like normally like businesses that would have gotten like the most business they've ever had in their history, that people were not allowed to be around there unless they have like certain permission. It was just extremely strict, that all of these like watch parties had to be canceled, and that like he fell asleep during the game. And so it's like, well, what's the point then? Why are you there? It just is like to flex power. And people were booing, as they should, and he was extremely butthurt about that, and then like left after halftime, apparently. Not sure if you know about what happened in the last female World Soccer Cup. Most of the people didn't even know the character. No, what is this? I'm intrigued.
Square Garden Monday evening as he attended Game 3 of the NBA Finals between the New York Knicks and the San Antonio Spurs. The unwelcome reception drowned out the singing of the national anthem after a camera showed Trump saluting from a VIP suite surrounded by bulletproof glass.
Whose brush stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight.
Why does the granddaughter like look amused?
Fans reportedly waited outside Madison Square Garden for hours due to a strict security protocol resembling TSA, and Trump's presence prompted the New York police to cancel a watch party outside Madison Square Garden that would have attracted thousands of people. We'll have more on this story later in the broadcast with the nation's sports editor, Dave Zirin. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York, joined by Democracy Now!'s Juan Gonzalez in Chicago. Hi, Juan.
Hi,
Which
Amy,
that
and welcome to all of
performer
our listeners and viewers across
was
the country
an
and around the
incredible
world.
vocalist.
Thanks for
So
watching
I feel bad
Democracy
for
Now! On
him
YouTube.
that
Subscribe
he
to the channel and turn on
was on
notifications
that
to make sure you never
receiving
miss a
end of
video.
things, even though
And
it
for
wasn't
more of our
directed towards
audience-supported
him.
journalism, go to democracynow.org,
Them.
where you can download our news app, sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to the daily podcast, and so much more.
Automod I don't know why that is even a term that is moderated. That's like not even offensive. But just goes to show how skewed a lot of things are. I don't think it's going to allow that one. He's looking for it. Him. Automod's a him. Well, when the female Spanish team won the last World Cup, the Spanish soccer manager forced a kiss on the player. Oh, this sounds familiar to me. This sounds familiar to me. He got fired. Really barely. No one knew the character. Kind of Spanish redneck. He's looking for it. Oh, are you referring to the manager and not Automod? Wait, there was a big drama here. I remember hearing about this. This was like one of the few things that I was like paying attention to because of how gross it was and misogynistic. Where it's like, excuse me, how is that allowed? Like, and this is like out in the open, him doing this. So like, what is he doing behind the scenes that he's getting away with? That's what I always think about. Of like, this is when they feel bold enough to do this stuff in public. Okay, I did want to watch this on Thursday. Indian Country Today, they have some good coverage of what is happening within Indigenous news. Okay, so getting to Kenya. So we do know that there are these Ebola outbreaks in Uganda, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, but also in Kenya as well. Wait, did I already say Uganda? Anyway, I don't even have the excuse of being drunk. My thoughts are just blending in together. But there are these demonstrations that have been happening. TRT World, they have reported on this. This is not getting as much coverage as much as it should. I don't care for sports, but I do love that Catalonian female soccer players are the best in the world. I guess a little national pride I allow myself. Well, there you go. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I didn't know that, but that's cool. I like that. But yeah, they shouldn't have to be subject to that kind of like non-consensual physical attacks.
Angry protesters take to the streets of Nanyuki in central Kenya.
That Catalonian.
Demonstrators say they cannot understand why the government is.
We're on some random Twitch channel. I'm curious about the Twitch channel, but you don't have to say. That's me being messy. We're saying that Catalonian was just not a sort of Spanish or obsessive male mods. Is it just like ignorance of like a sort of that Catalonian was just not a sort of Spanish? Is that how someone was talking about it? Yeah, it's like, okay, well, what came first? Because it's indigenous, isn't it? Wondering if I should get more drunk. I'm not gonna ruin your fun, but also like take care of yourself.
Is willing to establish a quarantine facility for you.
Yeah, that's what I gathered as well. That Catalonian came before Spanish did. That it's like, okay, if we're saying that, then Spanish is a type of Catalonian. That is like saying English. That's like, yeah, exactly.
Citizens exposed to Ebola.
Which I'm glad you brought that up, especially when people are oversensitive about that. Like, if they're being corrected, it's like, you're part of the problem. Like, and that's the need to be corrected. Like, you're just reinforcing that. And yeah, there really is so much censorship that goes on. It can be hard to understand like what is allowable and what isn't, and like even like as like being on this end of streaming myself of like what should be allowed and said, like what will get me like you know, like banned, or like what will be like a strike against me as well, and how that's like an ever-moving goalpost. So it just goes to show like these rules are not consistent, that they are continually favoring people who are not marginalized, and how like even how we have like the country of Niger, how that is continually censored, like that is a form of racism. Even if like you have people like they're, oh, we're wanting to be safe because people don't know how to spell if they're saying the N-word, that it's like that's just like as an idiotic thing. Like, so we can't ever say this country. When I went to Barcelona, I had no idea that the other languages, all signs and things, were Catalonian. As a Spanish speaker, I was very surprised to see how different the two are. Yeah, exactly. I think also because doesn't oh, what is the dance form? Why am I blanking? I'll think of it. Like that has been like co-opted by like colonizing forces. Flamenco. That is Catalonian, and that a lot of people have some criticism specifically of Rosalia, the musician, because of her flamenco dancing and a lot of co-opting of Catalonian culture rather than like paying homage to it or like bringing in people who are part of the culture. It's like that's still a form of colonization. 2 thumbs up for my ignorance. I mean, you also are not like trying to say like kick people out if they're saying otherwise, you know? Part of that is just growing up in the US and not having a great education about world affairs. I'm used to obsessive male mods just banning me for whatever reason, but while saying that Catalonian is not Spanish. Cultural defense. Some Spanish don't even know if it's Catalonian or French. Really? Does that also goes to show that they probably don't know very much French either. Not talking about Basque. It doesn't even Basque from Latin. Oh, I didn't know that. See, this is good to know. This is like, it is really cool having people who are international, like outside of the US, in the stream and part of the chat, because I learned a ton from you all that I'm like, wow, I have not learned this whatsoever. In any part of the world, the people in Spain that only talk one language, of course, doesn't even know the difference between anything. Yeah, exactly. That is true. Where, like, if you are not able to speak multiple languages, then you don't know the difference between things. But when you've studied Latin and Greek, Portuguese, Spanish, Catalonian, Galician, French, Italian, yeah. Yeah, I mean that is essentially like the difference, and like talking about Spain being the colonizer, that definitely applies, of how like Catalonian was there before Spanish was a language, just how like indigenous Peruvian dialects and languages were there before Spanish colonizers came in. Oh wait. This is so good to know. Thank you for the education. So this is in protest largely because, like, as we have been continuing to talk about, that all of these like aid programs, these monitoring and like vaccines that have been distributed through USAID, that it has had a devastating impact on global health, but particularly in these areas that have just been ravaged for colonial extraction, and how these places would not have to be in this situation in the first place if the US was not interfering and Western powers were not interfering to begin with. So, just calling that out.
Of the Congo. Angry protesters take to the streets of Nanyuki in central Kenya. Demonstrators say they cannot understand why the government is willing to establish a quarantine facility for US citizens exposed to Ebola. Arriving from the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
We are here today to reject the establishment of the quarantine center at the Laikipia Air Base, given that we as the community and society at large, we were not consulted.
Yes, what sign did he have, or was that a book?
We were not consulted.
The Constitution of Kenya? Is that what that said?
We as the
Oh, yep.
community and society at large, we were not consulted.
I love him in the background showing solidarity.
Could enter the country that has never recorded any cases of Ebola, but the government insists the initiative must move forward.
We agreed to set up in conjunction with the Americans in one of our military air bases. And why have we done that? We have a huge American military contingent in Kenya.
Satellite imagery indicates construction of the 50-bed isolation unit at Laikipia Air Base is progressing rapidly, despite a court order suspending the project. U.S. military aircraft have also reportedly transported personnel and equipment to the site.
It would be most unfortunate if, on one request by the Americans to set up a facility at their cost, we would refuse.
Initially, a U.S.-Kenya Health Cooperation Agreement was signed in December, but then later suspended by a Kenyan court over data privacy issues. But for many, fears of what infected patients could bring is making this type of collaboration unacceptable.
My message is this: Laikipia is not a dumping site, and our voices must be heard.
The World Health Organization has declared the Ebola outbreak in the DRC an international health emergency, with more than 500 cases reported. Neighboring Uganda has recorded more than a dozen confirmed cases. Protesters in Kenya argue that both Washington and Nairobi are exposing the country to unnecessary health risks by proceeding with the facility. Grace Kuriakanja, TRT World.
Yeah, so that's just like a larger example of ethnic cleansing tactics. And this was the intended result with stripping away these programs, is to have devastating impacts on human life there. In Africa, in general, the continent of Africa. For example, in the Americas, most Spanish colonizers came from the Canary Islands, and the Spanish that was developed is very close to the Spanish that is spoken in the Canary Islands. They don't even have an official category as a language, but they're so different that I cannot differentiate easily an Ecuadorian from a Canarian. Interesting. Canarians have been part from Spain hundreds of years before Catalonians, for example, stayed away from colonization for some political reasons. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. They probably were like, we can see what's going on. They only played more part in Cuba in later stages. What do you know about how Castellano fits in with all of that? That's a good question. Something that I follow recently, Lost Sue. They are a fellow Twitch streamer, and they were having, or he was having, a subathon and like playing some music, some more like rousing revolutionary music, and a lot of the music that he was playing was talking about this idea of saying like Hispanic, like Latin, Latino, Latina, Latine, that all of these terms are based off of the colonizer, rather than actually focusing on like indigenous dialects and nations and tribes that existed before borders crossed people. It's just what we call Spanish here. Oh, interesting. Only very nationalist Spaniards call their language Spanish. I didn't know that. Spanish is officially spoken in Latin America, not in Spain. Wow. Thank you for the education. That's great to know. The Kingdom of Spain was formed between Castilians, Galicians, Vasquez, and Catalonians. We four maintain our languages. Wow. Yeah, I didn't know that. But thank you for sharing. Speaking of Peru, Peru votes for president amid Trump's unprecedented program of aggression against leftists. So this is another Democracy Now! Video where they're talking about this. And as we see, especially when it comes to like the post-World War II era of American dominance, that there were all of the, because of U.S. interference in Central and South American countries, to especially as they're having more of these resistance movements and revolts, revolutions, that they placed dictators in order to have them be more amenable to the foreign policy and domestic policies of the U.S. empire.
Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. Peru's presidential runoff is...
Oh, I may have to refresh this.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. Peru's presidential runoff is too close to call after voters took to the polls Sunday in a heated election between the daughter of a former imprisoned dictator, her name, Keiko Fujimori, and a leftist lawmaker, Roberto Sanchez, proving election officials warned final results could take up to a month to confirm. The latest ballot count this morning showed Fujimori leading by just about a percentage point ahead of Sanchez, according to Reuters. Sanchez spoke from Lima Sunday.
In keeping with our democratic commitment, we have fulfilled our responsibility, and I urge all our fellow citizens to vote responsibly to save Peru and strengthen democracy. Let us respect the free vote and have the capacity to honor the agreements and the election results, always calling for democracy, justice, and social peace, and to move Peru forward.
Keiko Fujimori is the daughter of Peru's late U.S.-backed ruler Roberto Fujimori, who was convicted and imprisoned on crimes against humanity committed during his regime from 1990 to 2000. Peru's reeling from a period of political turmoil, with Sunday's runoff marking the 9th time Peruvians take to the polls to elect a new president in just 10 years. The entire Latin American region is experiencing one of its sharpest political shifts to the right in recent years, as President Trump aggressively intervenes, expanding attacks against leftist governments while backing a series of right-wing candidates in recent presidential elections, including in Colombia and Honduras. Meanwhile, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has also accused far-right sectors in the U.S. of coordinating with domestic groups to destabilize the Mexican government. For more, we go to two guests. In Lima, Peru, we're joined by Gustavo Guerra Garcia-Picasso, a Peruvian economist and public policy expert who's held various high-level government and academic positions over the past 20 years.
They just don't give up until they're made to stop.
History professor, Pulitzer
That's
Prize
very
winning
difficult
author,
to
his
actually
latest book, America
accomplish.
America, A New History of the New World, now available in paperback. His new piece for the New York Review of Books is headlined The Education of Pope Leo XIV. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Let's begin with Gustavo Guerra Garcia Picasso. Talk about what has happened and if you've been surprised by how close this runoff is and who Sanchez and Fujimori are.
Thanks for the invitation. I'm very glad to be here with your audience. Well, Keiko Fujimori, she's not leading the voting count. In the last counting of votes that we have, what we call the quick count of the votes, Roberto Sanchez is leading by 50.3% against 49.7% of Keiko Fujimori. So as this kind
Watching
of
the Spanish news,
quick counting votes
lawfare against the
has a very
president's
big
family
sample,
for years.
all
Yeah.
indicates that Roberto Sanchez will
Especially as he has been like very vocal against all of this genocide that is going on with these tactics that are being used with these empires. And yeah, I remember you saying in some previous streams that there are plenty of tactics that are being used that are just being mirrored. But it also just goes to show as well that these tactics don't really change. That because they have historically worked for the ruling class, there isn't really a need for them to be creative in how they're instituting all of this. But they don't have creativity. They just have power imbalance and money, which supports their power imbalance. The Pope was in Barcelona today. Best Pope in 2 decades, even if American. Yeah, he has been very outspoken about a lot of things going on that I've been very impressed with. That like even like I know many people were impressed with Pope Francis, that like he's been even more outspoken about like world affairs, and it's like, yeah, that's great. We need that. Those tactics didn't exist here 10 years ago. Yeah, or at least like in the way that they do now, that like they've just kind of been rebranded over time, because I do think it's like even though it seems like there's been even more of an escalation in the US in particular, and that kind of like sets the tone because of like global empire. But and there has been an escalation, to be sure, but also talking about how like many of these kinds of tactics were just like not quite as out in the open, or they had more of like this idea of like politeness to be branding it in a way that's like not quite as blatant. So I don't think it's that they haven't ever existed before. Ended up electing a guy named Pedro Pablo Kuczynski. News weren't filled with lawfare. Yeah, that is true. Or at least openly, that they weren't like reporting on it very proudly, but like it might have been happening behind the scenes as to like the owners of these outlets. At least in like the US, that has always been a thing. I talked about if politics are going well or bad. 10 years ago, I was always working in politics. Ooh, that's rough. No, I can only hear noise. It really is like interesting, especially if you've like worked within the system. Like I used to work for the Utah government, of like being able to be on the outside. I mean, like on the inside and see what goes on, how like it really is alarming, the things that do go on. And then being on the outside and being like, okay, what does this mean? Like, how can I even like exist as like a quote unquote like normal person, having like seen some of this stuff, like the inner workings, and also understanding that it's like cold hard machinery, and that most of the time people are put in these positions, or like they are elevated, able to continue a career because they agree with a lot of the things that are not great. And it's like, oh, so then what now? What do we do? How do we change things? Which is why like outside pressure is so important.
Will be the next president of Peru.
So talk more about, I mean, daughter of a father doesn't necessarily represent her father's politics. But in this case, in fact, does Fujimori represent her father?
Yes, Fujimori represents her father. And in the last years, Democracy has been undermined by constitutional changes led by her that have disrupted the balance of powers and allowed one branch of government to capture several independent branches. Now the president can be removed from office in a month, a week,
And
or
my
even a day.
bosses sell themselves out, and I
Reforms
left.
must be implemented quickly to restore
See, that is also what is so hard too, is like, even if, and this is where it shows like some of the issues or limitations, that's the word that I'm looking for, more of electoralism, is like, even if you get people in that people like, or like, oh, they're going to do a great job, like Linton brought this up last week, fellow like frequent viewer and chatter, and was saying how it's like, even if you get people in that you like, that these systems are going to do what they were built to do. So even if people go in being like well-meaning, it is very difficult for people to stay well-meaning and not actually be absorbed by the system and changed by the system that is largely anti-human and not actually looking out for the majority of people. No party will be enough lefty ever for me. I mean, I kind of feel similarly. It's like there are so many limitations that like within all of these systems that prevent that from even happening in the first place, like the development of it, let alone like getting someone in that will be able to work in a fashion that is particularly for the majority, like, and when we mean the majority, like actually most human beings, which is like the working class, like the 99% of us, that most of these systems are just so corrupt a lot of the time, and there are all of these power imbalances that you can go in with good intentions and it still is not able to be implemented, or it is very difficult to not turn into one of the people that they originally thought they were fighting against. Kind of like that example of what I gave with like voting for anyone in the executive branch. You have to understand that they're becoming the top cop, and that like when they are running for office, or like a lot of the time before, like in their everyday life, they'll be like, oh, I'm critical of this system because of all of these aspects, or I don't like living in a police state. But then also acknowledging that like people soften their language when it comes to law enforcement when they are running for office, because they're like, oh, I'm going to be in charge of people. And it's like, okay, well, this is part of the problem, that in order to make it into power in the first place, people have to make all these concessions and be like less radical, whatever that means. I had the power to change stuff, and we did. Some of my co-party members still voted them because they know they're better than the rest. I'll not forget the personal treacheries. Yeah, and I don't think you should. Maybe that's like the Scorpio in me. That I'm like, don't forget when people have wronged you. It doesn't mean that like you always like carry it with you necessarily, but like I think that's healthy to not just be like, oh, I'm going to forgive everyone. That's like, not everyone deserves that. And if they don't, then like, why should we still vote for them? Yeah, and that's like just highlighting the same issue of like having all of these shitty options, that it's like, okay, so we're doing damage control rather than actually fighting for like a liberatory process that actually gives us human dignity, rather than trying to constantly be on damage control.
System with check and balances, and to reduce political instability. No? And the responsibility of these new problems is Keiko's constitutions of 2024.
And can you talk about Sanchez's position, and particularly his support for indigenous people? Sanchez thanking the support of the Quechua, the Aymara, the Amazonian peoples, of farmers, teachers, shopkeepers, transportation workers, and young people.
I mean, that is cool. Rare to actually get
we have now
someone running for office acknowledging the humanity of indigenous people.
The interior versus Lima, the poor versus the wealthy. Now the government of the Together for Peru party must carefully.
But again, that doesn't mean that even if he is elected into office, that he is not going to act in ways that is not honoring the humanity of all of these people. So just calling that out.
reconcile the country by closing divides and solving problems. Obviously, Roberto Sanchez is representing the votes of the poor and the votes of the vast social majority of the country.
And has President Trump had an effect on the Peruvian elections, Gustavo?
Not really. I think the government of the United States is having an effect on some public policies, like the pressure for buying military airplanes, or the pressure for building a military base close to Lima in the Callao province. But I think the American administration has been very cautious in not interfering with the electoral process of Peru.
That certainly is not true for the rest of Latin America, President Trump's role. But first, Professor Grandin, I wanted to ask you about this piece you wrote in the New York Review of Books, The Education of Pope Leo XIV. As a young missionary in Peru, the Pope witnessed a war on liberation theology and was indelibly stamped by the movement's commitment to the poor. Start in Peru and then go broader to Latin America.
Well, regarding Pope Leo's piece, Peru in many ways was the cradle of liberation theology, that current within Catholicism that radicalized the church, that committed the church to the poor, and to promote political change, even radical political change, with many nuns and priests and lay people joining insurgencies or joining social movements. And Leo at the time, Father Bob Prevost from Chicago, from a kind of peace Catholic.
Or is a danger. Yeah, it's like at least. It's like I will be the first to say, and like there are many people on the left that will be like very upset with me with saying this, but like there is no ideology that cannot be co-opted and corrupted, because that is human nature a lot of the time. Or when we have these like power structures that people are wanting to take advantage of, that is hard to maintain an ideology, or like people to not use this for nefarious means. Like I think that it doesn't matter what it is, but yeah, when there is one side that is just constantly advocating for this cannibalistic idea of exploiting people till like there aren't any people left to exploit, and like how violent all of that process is, like, and with literal violence as well, that like the danger of that can't be underestimated. Yeah, like how you were saying, it's not even just about one particular figure or person, that there are many of these factors that have already been in the works for a very long time, and that a lot of the time this is exported through like global imperialism rather than acknowledging, but many people want to say like, if only like this person was gone, or if this person was out of the way, and it's like that just like, and that's where I can call out like some of the issues of electoralism, is that it's like it's not just about finding like saviors for these situations, that like the issues that most people are experiencing are like very sprawling and diverse, that cannot be fixed just by electing one person people like into office, because there are all of these other forces that are at play in like the system itself, especially when it comes to like money involvement in government and elections, and just like granting of contracts. That in and of itself is like a very corrupted process, that it's like a lot of this exists, and like we just have these figures that take advantage of these types of moments and systems in order to get into power in the first place. Many people think the previous dictator was good. Yeah, it really is astonishing how short people's memories are and attention spans. I do think there is this aspect of like that has only been heightened in the digital age, where we can be entertained into a stupor rather than like being forced to engage with uncomfortable feelings and situations, or like having conversations with people, that it's easier to just like not say things and just like turn to our phones or a TV show and just be like, okay, I guess this is the answer. And like that's part of like the same concept of like what we have talked about before, what many people talk about, of like the decline of the Roman Empire, and how like using gladiators and like fighting in the Colosseum to distract from rampant corruption in the government and the fall of the empire, that it's like so many like humans are really not most of the time that creative, particularly the people who are like in the ruling class, where it's like these tactics are just like recycled. It may have like a facelift, it may have a rebranding, but it doesn't mean that like people aren't trying to implement a lot of the same things, which is like sad because it makes it seem like a lot of it just kind of comes back to human nature. I'm not necessarily like the most optimistic about human nature itself, but also like confronting the fact that like if we're somehow able to disassemble some of these structures that are telling us and like propagandizing us into thinking that like these inequalities are natural and good and what is supposed to exist, that like we have a lot more in common with each other than we certainly do with the ruling class, with the 1% who are telling us that like these hierarchies are meant to exist because it supports their own position. Yeah. But I mean, I agree. A lot of the time it's just about like people taking advantage of the moment that all of these things have been existing.
Background was very much influenced by this tradition, and he allied with Pope Francis, who at the time was the Archbishop of Buenos Aires, of Buenos Aires, yeah, and they in many ways they worked together to push back against the kind of Vatican attempt to undermine liberation theology, and they pushed back very effectively. They really kind of contained Opus Dei within Peru. I mean, Leo's tenure in Peru over the course of 20 years corresponded to Pope John Paul and Joseph Ratzinger, who became Pope Benedict's campaign to isolate and undermine liberation theology, and then Leo was appointed bishop by Francis, and then he presided over a kind of rollback of the rollback. So in many ways, that's shaping his moral vision, his humanism. It comes in many ways out of Latin America.
It's interesting. The world, in some ways, you can watch the tension between Pope Leo and President Trump as they also take on each other. Yeah, but in Latin America, in these last minutes we have, talk about the rightward shift, Professor Grandin, and talk about President Trump's role from Peru to Honduras, Mexico, and beyond.
Yeah, the best way to think about it is compared to the Middle East. In the Middle East, the war in Iran, an unforced error, which has led Trump to a kind of box himself in with no exit strategy, unwilling, unable to restrain Israel as it goes into Lebanon, as it meddles in Syria. It's a disaster, and it's a fiasco. Latin America is exactly the opposite. You see a kind of full spectrum press on the whole continent. Like, this is not a country maybe apart from Uruguay, where the United States isn't actively involved in the internal politics. And you see what's being put into place is the full spectrum of hard power. We have regime change in Venezuela, lawfare. We're seeing the United States allying with militaries, trying to expand as the military footprint of the United States in Peru, in Ecuador, relaunching the war on drugs. What's at stake with the election in Peru, the election coming up in Colombia is
I think what he's describing is just a continuation of U.S. foreign policy when it comes to the global South in general, but particularly Central and South America, and interference there. It just is more out in the open. Trump can be as dismissive about Europe, but triple the population, and people forget National Socialism doesn't have such a bad ring about it. Well, that is what is so ironic, is that like there are many systems that are implemented that are like this, that are thriving. And I mean, that's not to say like there isn't room for more liberation because of like this global capitalism and bourgeois, like we are in global feudalism, especially techno-feudalism. But like, yeah, it's just so demonized here in the US, and I think that largely has to do with the Red Scare and the Cold War, and making it so like that has always shown of like the sympathies of being in like the US in policy has always been farther right than it has left, and why there was this resistance to even enter the Western Front of World War II, because let's be honest, the people in charge had much more in common with the Third Reich than they did with any sort of leftist movement. The world is a powder keg and no one should test its luck. Yeah, it's like, this is where it's so important to recognize like global solidarity, and like there are a lot of us, and a lot of us are very angry, but especially people who have been the recipients of U.S. imperialist violence for so long. It's not like we have already. But yes, You don't need to be scared about that. I mean, maybe not like from me, maybe for other reasons, but yeah. Hello, Aliana. Welcome. How are you doing? Yeah, it just goes to show that, like, especially all of us in the 99% globally who are not in these positions of power and have exorbitant wealth, where we're all these people who are invested in the industrial war complex and big pharma and the beauty and fashion industries and like just so-called like culture that they are commodifying, and also like the how they are all invested in AI. It's like this all affects us on a global scale. We all have a lot more in common in fighting this than we do that is like telling us that we're different. In theory, but if we are able to actually get to that point and somehow have more of like an organizing mechanism to evoke change, that is the real thing. Like, as we have been talking about in our reading of like people who are co-opting the ruling class, co-opting these forms of communication to making it so that we can't actually speak with one another, and like censorship is a huge part of that. That wealth means nothing if we go to war economy. Yeah, exactly, because that is what counts for people in the ruling class. I am high, I am tipsy. Are you sure he magically became normal? I mean, it's good to highlight the fact that people need to have consequences. They need to have truth told to them and also consequences for their nefarious actions, but not to minimize the work that you are doing. But I can be skeptical about like what actually makes people change. But I mean, it's like, who's to say it's one particular thing or another? It usually is like a buildup of things over time. The brink of being total drunk. And still being able to like have a coherent conversation. I'm impressed. Yeah, people need to both drinking. This is the substances corner. I love that for everyone.
Really, if Trump wins those countries and back for the United States, then we're going to see a full-on re-escalation of the war on drugs, Plan Colombia, which was devastating for the countries involved, devastating for Colombia, and that's
you have a low tolerance, and you had two shots.
The United States is using a combination of CIA covert ops in the north and lawfare in order to box in Claudia Sheinbaum.
I'm surprised you're coherent.
Stands as the polar opposite of Bukele in El Salvador. Sheinbaum and Bukele are the two most popular presidents in Latin America, and they represent polar opposite political projects. Right? Bukele is basically this dystopian project of eliminating due process. And
I feel like that would, even without a low tolerance, that would do it for anyone.
And Sheinbaum is trying to
certainly me.
Mexican humanism, a Latin American humanism, universalism through economic redistribution. But you know, she's her room for maneuver is tight. Cuba is really just the tip of the iceberg. It really is a kind of unprecedented. We have 20 seconds. Okay, it really is an unprecedented program.
I think that also just displays the fact I never really had that aspect of
effective and successful
adolescence as much. So now that I'm like in my 30s and indulging, I'm like, oh, that time has passed.
And Gustavo Guerra Garcia Picasso, Peruvian economist and public policy expert, speaking to us from Peru. That does it for our show.
Have you seen the spliffs that Erykah Badu
and next week in
smokes?
Belfast on Tuesday night for
you should look this up.
That does it for our show. Go to our website, democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for watching Democracy Now! On YouTube.
Okay. I deserve a treat, I guess. Yeah, and like, I don't know if this is like being too doomsday about things, but honestly my mentality, especially with like the amount of surveillance and like talking more openly about certain topics and whatever, and like the state of the nation and just like the world in general, that it's like, who's to say what's going to happen? We might as well like have a little bit of enjoyment while we're at it. It is very cheap in Spain. I'm jealous. Okay, so I did want to show this, like, continuing the conversation about Lebanon. This is transitioning more, transing, if you will, which, same, into more of national politics, things that are happening in the US, but we cannot separate what is happening to Lebanon and Palestine and not have that be a reflection on the US as well. So I wanted to play this from Forbes. I'm actually surprised Forbes is reporting on this. They really have
Mr. Speaker, I yield.
Been upset about certain things going on, and I wonder as well, like, how much of the owners of this publication have been negatively affected by all of these policies. I honestly think that's probably what's going on. Or they had enough people in their audience revolt where they started to change their tune a little bit. So like, that goes to show that there is still room for public pressure and outcry, that people are like, oh, but my money, my audience, like, please keep watching. That sometimes that does have an effect in making people change course. But unfortunately, with some aspects, like the billionaires that we are up against, that they have so much money to spend that they can't possibly spend it in like multiple lifetimes, that they're beyond public pressure a lot of the time. But it's so interesting because they also seem to be like deeply insecure and wanting public favor, but don't want to do anything to actually acquire it. They just want to pay for it. And it's like, sweetie, that's not how it works. You actually have to like care about other human beings, but it doesn't seem like they're capable of that.
Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
We must end the U.S. participation in the Israeli government's violent assault on Lebanon. Over 3,400 people in Lebanon have been massacred since the start of the Israeli apartheid government's brutal invasion and indiscriminate bombing campaign. Children, Mr. Speaker, medics, journalists, schools, hospitals, churches, mosques, these all have been targeted by the Israeli government. Critical civilian infrastructure, entire residential neighborhoods are systematically being destroyed. More than 1.2 million people have been forced to leave their homes or be killed, with the Israeli military telling them that they will not be allowed to return. Last week, Mr. Speaker, the Israeli government issued a forced displacement order for all the areas south of the Zahrani River, declaring the entire vast region to a combat zone. Mr. Speaker, that is 14% of all of Lebanon, home to hundreds of thousands of people of all faiths, as well as over 300 cities and towns, including Lebanon's fourth largest city, Tyre. That's 14% of the country told to either
I'm glad
leave
we're
or
getting
die.
a mention in there.
This is not a national security, Mr. Speaker. This is an ethnic cleansing campaign. The Israeli leaders and the cabinet members are open about this. Finance Minister Smotrich literally called for the annexing of at least 10% of Lebanon, saying that this is the new Israeli border, must be the Litani River, up to the Litani River. Defense Minister Katz of Israel has openly stated that the government of Israel plans to pursue an indefinite military occupation of southern Lebanon up
Please
to the
also
river,
drink
even
some
after the war
water,
is
just
over.
for
The National Security Minister,
the
Ben
sake
Gvir,
of
has proposed Israel to go even further to
hydration.
conquer and occupy Lebanese territory, all the way north
Not to
of
ruin
the
your
river.
fun.
These are not fringe figures. These are the
hot, and I'm
Israeli
used to
security
being in
cabinets.
winter
They're the
all
most
year.
powerful decision makers in the Israeli government. And Mr. Speaker, they have made it clear that their goal is to do what they were doing in Lebanon.
Yeah, that's real.
What they did in Gaza. The Israeli military officials even stated in their aim is to implement what they call, quote, the Gaza model in Lebanon. I can go on in explaining this, but I think what is important to understand is the act of the psychological terror that the government putting leaflets all throughout Beirut, threatening Lebanon with repeat of the remarkable success in Gaza. And I want folks to know, my colleagues to know, over the last 3 months, we have already seen these horrific threats become a reality. This Congress did nothing.
4 liters a day.
To save
Wow.
lives in Gaza.
Okay.
And we
Then
must act
you don't
now,
need me
though, to
to
prevent the
be
same fate in Lebanon.
parenting
And I
you.
want folks to know we're here because the United States is not a bystander to these war crimes. It is an active participant. The Trump administration has engaged in unlawful and unauthorized participation in hostilities as part of the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in violation of the War Powers Act. The Trump administration is providing intelligence, coordinating strikes, and demonstrating overt command over Israeli military decisions, including greenlighting specific Israeli attacks and operations throughout Lebanon, including Beirut.
Just these symbols of
in his own public
a complete disregard for humanity and
asserted authority to approve, prohibit,
human lives, and also
condition,
the
and
history of
direct
human
Israeli
lives.
military operations. In one such example, the Israeli government
these
sought and was
expansionist
granted Trump's quote, green light
projects.
for its May 6th strike, the strike on Beirut,
Chopping down olive trees, I
coordinated
know.
with the U.S. in advance to coordinate Israeli officials and Israel's state officials mentioned this and said it publicly, but even Israel's own public government state broadcasting station admitted it.
Yes.
Not only is the Trump administration illegally participating in this violent
They
campaign,
can be more
it is openly
honest
ignoring
about what's going on
congressional oversight,
than
Mr.
what
Speaker,
U.S.
of the U.S.
media
Armed
is.
Forces involvement in Lebanon. On May 7th, Senator Welch and a number of senators wrote to the administration requesting specific information about U.S. coordination with the Israeli strikes, and other actions that would violate the War Powers Act, including refueling, intelligence sharing, targeting, and other assistance. We all know the senators have not received any answers, and the executive branch has not even tried to argue that the U.S. role in Israeli hostilities in Lebanon complies with U.S. law. Congress must reassert its constitutional authority, Mr. Speaker. Immediately vote to end the U.S. participation in the destruction of Lebanon. I want to make one thing clear, though, and it's super important for my colleagues to understand. Section 5C of the War Powers Act makes it clear that Lebanon War Powers Resolution only applies to U.S. armed forces engaged in hostilities. The resolution will not affect U.S. training and support of Lebanese armed forces or the routine protection of U.S. diplomatic facilities, neither of which are involved in hostilities. The War Powers Resolution exclusively ends the U.S. participation in the ongoing Israeli invasion of Lebanon. That's what this vote is about, nothing less. The American people are tired. They're exhausted of these endless wars. They are tired of hearing that we don't have money for health care and child care, but yet here we are. U.S. bombs destroying hospitals and stealing future of children abroad. This vote on the Lebanon War Powers Resolution is a clear moral choice. Do you stand with the Netanyahu government and Trump's endless war crimes, or do you stand with human life, peace, and justice? With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Oh, whoops. I don't know what that was about. I'm glad that Rashida Tlaib is talking about that, but I'm interested in what the comments are, of course. So even with this publication feeling pressured to talk more about global issues in a more honest way, it doesn't mean that their audience is always hip to what's happening, meaning not deeply fascist. And also we have to admit that there are probably plenty of bots, people who are oh my god. Yeah. Plenty of people on the internet that are being paid to do this and act like they're just normal civilians rather than part of the CIA or FBI. Some years ago in Gaza, I didn't know much. I think many of us did not. And that is also part of this propaganda mechanism as well. The machine of this global propaganda. My old major from Barcelona, Ada Colau, was detained by the IDF on a helping flotilla. Yeah, it's been going on for such a long time. that like many of us have not been aware of. She was from my political party. I started learning that is an evil state. Yeah, it's about domination. It has nothing to do with religious freedom and wanting to actually have like a safe place for people, because like if it was, then why are there all of these hierarchies of human dignity that are enforced in such a violent, deplorable, evil way? US is evil, and the fault is not from damn Protestants or whatever. Well, yeah, I mean, it certainly is. I think many people in the world understand this. And I think many people are just now kind of starting to understand, especially on a global scale, just how deeply uninterested many people in the American populace just don't care about everything that is going on in our name and being done with our tax dollars, because it's like, oh, as long as we get to like watch sports and feel like we're better than other people, it's like, that's not how it works. People don't pay attention until they feel like personally affected. And even then, sometimes that's not the case. So yeah, it's like, I mean, the whole nation state of the US is built off of genocide, settler colonialism, stealing of land, ethnic cleansing. So, like, how can it not also be a supporter of this abroad? Because it justifies its own existence that way. Saying to now all the world hates Israel. Well, I mean, yeah. But like that's ever going to... The thing with him saying that is like, he's not going to do anything meaningful to stop what's going on. Because like he, even though is like technically wanting to say like stopping the war is in the interest, like his goal, like the larger expansionist project is also in the benefit of most of US foreign policy. People care about three things typically in this order: themselves, their finances, then their family. Yeah, exactly. If you can affect these three things or hold these things within the palm of your hand. Yeah, I think that's a really great assessment. That, like, that does seem to be human nature, or at least what is enforced, what is conditioned in us and considered human nature. The jury is still out on that for me, because I don't know. I don't think human nature is that great of a thing. But, you know, I'm willing to have my mind be changed. Okay, I did want to show... I'm just looking at what I've planned for today. I did want to show this on Lebanon. That this came out today, just as we have been talking about Lebanon specifically. Spain was from the first countries of the world to recognize Palestine. Yeah. That was my party doing. Yeah, the current president is from the left, but is the old regime. Even then, he's saying the things that needed to be said about Trump, trying to stop all trade from Europe with Israel. He gained my silly little vote. I know, but that's what's sad though. And like, as I like have been talking about before this, of like the limitations of like elected politics a lot of the time is like having to choose between like choices that people are not very happy with. And that has like historically been a thing. And it's not just a phenomenon in the US, but in the world at large. We don't have the cleanest slate. Yeah, expelling Jewish people. Yeah, I mean, most like Western powers are not exempt from this. And that's not even to say that like powers outside of like what is considered like the Eurocentric West is that other people have not been invested in ethnic cleansing campaigns or genocides, but that there have been tactics like expansionist settler colonial tactics that have been spearheaded by Western powers. Doesn't disallow my arguments the same that I'm not guilty of the American butcheries. Yeah, and also like understanding that like if we have this kind of history, that we have a duty to learn more about it and understand like our own complicity in these things, and that largely our complicity lies in ignorance, and that they keep us ignorant for this reason through policies and disempowering us and forcing us to be working all the time to afford to live rather than actually having time to enjoy and talk to one another. That is a huge fear of all of these people who are in the ruling class, that they do not want us actually communing with one another, establishing networks where we understand what's going on a global scale, which is why like I'm very grateful for you all and being willing to even engage in these conversations, especially when like there really is so much censorship going on, and like we are on a platform that is owned by Jeffrey Bezos. But how it's like, how are we able to even get out of these systems of communication that they are controlling anyway? That like I think the more we can be not online, not in the digital space. I don't know why I have a hard time saying that so often these days. Digital space, that we will get more power that way, that they have less control. The Catholic kings owed a lot of money to the Jews, so they expelled them and kept the money. Fair? Well, with that money, they did all the rest. Yeah, and also like the fact that like throughout all of Europe, for the most part, that Jewish people for a very long time were not allowed to own property, were not allowed to own livestock, and were exempt from all of these aspects of making a living for themselves, making money, that a lot of these jobs within money lending were some of the few aspects of being able to make money for people. And then that is why like this historically happens to like all marginalized people, where they are relegated to a specific area and like certain attributes, like for types of work, where like it's a hallmark of their marginalization, that then these aspects are used to then justify marginalization and painting people with a broad brush, rather than actually acknowledging that people were forced into circumstances, and that like these oppressive powers benefit from demonizing people and further exploiting them by putting them in these positions. Yes, the American stuff too. They were great. Well, I'm a Republican. Yeah, that can mean a different thing as well. Yeah, you do have a king. Our abdicated king was living in Qatar a year ago. Oh, I didn't know that. We don't want him here anyway. I don't think aristocracies really have anything good to offer. Like, even from like a so-called cultural standpoint, it's like, okay, we don't need that. What kind of culture is that? So much stuff everywhere. Our old king is still in Abu Dhabi. No. Yeah, not engaging in the best of activities, I'm sure. Let's see. I did want to show this historian talking about South Lebanon and the ethnic cleansing project going on there, because I think she has some really great things to say. I only started this video. So horror and corrupt. That's why he abdicated. I mean, there at least was like this sense of self-awareness, or at least public pressure. What we're having in the US are like the people who are controlling even like these billionaires, and like the 1% controlling even the markets that these aristocrats are relying on, that it's like they are exempt from even this type of shame where they feel a need to flee directly to the Emirates. Yeah, that tends to happen, and usually not great things are there because they're like, oh, this is where there are some of the largest like human trafficking operations and, you know, like corrupt business dealings. It's just all of this global complicity in capitalism, but like why we need to be talking about it more as like feudalism once again. We're paying for nothing. I know, I've never understood that, being in the US, of like people wanting monarchies, of like so they can wear like they can live these lavish lives where they're like beyond any sort of accountability. But then again, we have that in the US just with more of like the business people. Okay, I do think I need to refresh this video.
We begin today's show in Lebanon, where Israel's
So let's hear from this historian about her perspective of the ethnic cleansing campaign.
continuing to carry out deadly attacks despite a call by President Trump to halt
Speed it
strikes.
up
In the
again.
deadliest attack, Israel killed 9 people in the city of Tyre earlier today. Israel also ordered residents of Tyre to leave the city. On Monday, an Israeli attack near a Red Cross center in Tyre killed 5 people. 4 paramedics were wounded. Meanwhile, Hezbollah said Monday it had fired rockets at advancing Israeli forces in southern Lebanon. Israel's repeated attacks on Lebanon prompted Iran on Sunday to carry out its first strikes on Israel since April. Israel responded by retaliating against Iran. On Monday, Iran announced it would halt new attacks on Israel, but warned it would carry out a more severe response if Israel continues to attack Lebanon. We go now to Beirut, where we're joined by Leila Yunus, investigative journalist and writer based in Beirut. Her most recent piece for Dropsite headlined, "You either leave right now or you die, Israel's ethnic cleansing of a village in Lebanon." Why don't you describe what you have written about, Leila, and talk about the Iran attacking Israel over what it's doing in Lebanon, and then Israel striking back, then apparently President Trump speaking to the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and warning him to stop hitting Iran. So they agreed, but they're still attacking Lebanon.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Amy. So first, I'll take you to the village of Ain Arab, which is a small village in the plains near the southern border. That's what I wrote about for my last Dropsite story. And it's the story of what can only really be described as the ethnic cleansing of that village. People returned there after the quote-unquote ceasefire in mid-April. And I think this story, along with others, will tell you just how much the word ceasefire has lost its meaning in both Lebanon and in Gaza. But these villagers returned after the ceasefire. The first day that they're there, and a group of Israeli soldiers visit the village, tell them that there's a curfew, and they set up a checkpoint on the southern end of the village. 12 days later, they return in
Dropsite News, they do some really great reporting. I remember seeing their videos recommended to me like right when they were starting to do more reporting, when they created the entity, and they had like very few views, and so I was like, what is this? What is this Dropsite News? And because I was giving into optics of things, and I was like, well, like I would watch some things occasionally, but also with someone or something claiming to be a news outlet and them not having like them only having like 25 views on something, I was skeptical. But I'm one to talk because that's also like shit that my content does. And people have to start somewhere. And since then, like, because they do such rigorous, excellent reporting, they just have really expanded their reach. And I'm really excited to see all they've done. Like, actual journalism, actual reporting. Most kingdoms in Europe ended because they supported Hitler. Yeah. When Hitler lost, they were all done and everything became republics, but we're in the dictatorship, kingless. Yeah, or at least they became, like, at least in name. Kingless, supported by America, and Hitler. He reinstated monarchy. Yeah. And Yeah, this is where you see like a lot of these factions break out around this time as well, where there are even more parties, or at least some of the parties that exist start to do their own rebranding because it's like, oh, that didn't look good for us. And then they learn from previous tactics. It's just sad business. It's dangerous to do reporting on Lebanon. Yeah, exactly. Really, like any sort of reporting that is going against this larger expansionist imperialist project of the U.S.-Israeli military and nation states.
100 of them. Streaming behind an armored bulldozer. My source, Nasreen Abdel Al, is at her corner store when this happens. They sweep into the village. They tell people you have 2 hours to leave. They don't even give them that, according to Nasreen. They go door to door at gunpoint, telling people you leave right now or we shoot you. And I think that, this story is really emblematic of what we've seen among villages in the southern region. And remember, Ain Arab is actually north of the so-called yellow line, underscoring the arbitrary nature of these boundaries. So, the kind of continued insistence that southern Lebanese people leave their land, head north with nowhere to go. And what sources have told me, whether in the city of Surtir, as you were just talking about in your headlines, or in the city of Nabatia or other villages across the south, is more and more people saying, well, we actually refuse to leave because for months now they've been forced into displacement. They've been forced to live in government shelters that are not adequate, are not clean. They've also been subjected to steep rent hikes and scrutiny because many of them are from the Shia community, which Israel has made a point of targeting even into their displacement. Now, as for the second part of your question, Iran made very clear that an Israeli escalation in Beirut would derail negotiations. Israel clearly did not heed this call. They've been wanting to strike the southern suburbs, and they did in broad daylight in the neighborhood of Hayy Silom. And then following that, Iran in the evening launched a volley of missiles towards Israel. Israel then responds, and then you have Trump on Truth Social, right, stop shooting. And I think it's just really important to emphasize the absurdity of all of this, right? Because, Trump is kind of waving his hand saying, we want a deal, we want peace. Let's remember this all began with the U.S.-Israeli assault on Iran. That's kind of what this whole thing was sparked from. And the U.S.'s continued support for Israel's aggression in southern Lebanon is the reason we are where we are right now.
And Lila, you also said that the Israel-Lebanon truce plan, and the one that was reached in 2024, 2 years ago, was the so-called ceasefires, that now there's these so-called pilot zones where basically the Lebanese army is supposed to sweep in and demilitarize them. Can you talk about that?
Yes. So basically on June 3rd, following another round of negotiations between the Lebanese and the Israelis at the Pentagon in Washington, they come out with a new agreement, which resembles very closely the November 2024 ceasefire. The only difference is that there's going to be these so-called pilot zones where the Israeli military in the areas that it's currently occupied will retreat and then will be replaced by the Lebanese army, which will then search for Hezbollah's weapon stores supposedly and destroy them. This is absurd for multiple reasons. The first of which is because the Lebanese army has demonstrated throughout the 15-month ceasefire period its inability to disarm Hezbollah. Secondarily, it is basically a legitimation of continued Israeli presence in the south. And thirdly, and I think most importantly, this agreement includes no similar stipulations for Israel. So basically, Israel is allowed freedom of movement in the south of Lebanon in a scenario that many have begun comparing to the occupied West Bank. Remember, in that 15-month ceasefire period, Israel invaded Lebanese territory over 1,500 times,
like war,
according
but I hope
to
the
the United
Nazis
Nations
get what they
peacekeeping
deserve.
forces based
Yeah,
in the
exactly.
south. So, what they're basically looking for is impunity. They're looking
Sadly,
for
we
forever
see
war, where they are
justice,
essentially able to
actual
continue their
justice,
incursions, continue their
be
drone strikes,
evaded
and the Lebanese people
all
are
the
sort of
time.
supposed to accept this.
Which is
what do you make of all
why,
the press reports,
like,
especially in the West,
when
of a
there
rift
can be
between Trump and
times
Netanyahu using
of people
continued
having
invasion in
accountability
Lebanon to
for
subvert any
actions,
possible
it
peace agreement with
must
Iran?
be taken advantage
I really
of.
see this all as political theater because the United States continues its military support for Israel. It continues to support, even most recently, Marco Rubio, we heard, convinced Trump to support Israel strikes on Iran. So,
Yeah, exactly.
any sort of rifts that
We need to
we
call
might
things what
see
they
in the
are,
media,
because like
an
dancing
angry phone call between
around
Netanyahu
the
and Donald Trump
topics
is
and like
ultimately
trying to
meaningless
find
when,
different
the
words for
basic
things has
conditions in
not
the
been
South
helpful.
and the
It's
basic
been
goal of
a
Israel,
form
right,
of
continued
censoring
presence
what
in
is
southern
actually
Lebanon,
going
continued
on.
occupation, right? As long as that is upheld, supported, as long as they are granted impunity and arms by the United States, any sort of political theatrical phone calls are ultimately meaningless.
Layla Yunus,
Yeah.
investigative journalist and writer
That's
based in
also
Beirut.
how I view that phone call that you were quoting, is that it's like, even though that phone call happened and there were all these claims of like, this is why the world hates you, that it's like, he's not going to do anything meaningful. That I view that also as like him trying to take back the narrative and just use optics without doing anything that's meaningful.
We'll link to your piece for drop site. You either leave right now or you die. Israel's ethnic cleansing of a village in Lebanon. Thanks for watching Democracy Now! On YouTube. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to make sure.
Okay, so I did want to get to this video. Let me pull this up. Maybe we'll finish with Cuba, and because there's this historian they had on Democracy Now!, Ada Ferrer, on Cuba's crisis, that like it's been ongoing for a very long time, that I want to talk about it. Oh, but I did want to show this as we were talking about this particular nation state, and how there's always this argument used of like to justify genocide and occupation and settler colonialism, that it's like, oh, but like if queer people were here, then or whatever the argument is, it's like like the world's biggest pride event, and using that to justify like, oh, we're accepting. And it's like, no, you have to be for everyone's liberation. You can't just pick and choose which kind of queer people that you are wanting to actually humanize, that people are being viewed as tokens. They aren't being viewed as human beings, because that's not a shared type of humanity among marginalized people. So I really enjoy Alicia Marie's content in highlighting all of these aspects in culture and media that we need to talk about, particularly in the fight for Palestinian liberation. So I wanted to play this.
Israel promotes itself as a champion of LGBTQ rights. So let's talk about LGBTQ rights. Specifically, let's talk about the queer Palestinians that Israeli intelligence has exploited for blackmail. Palestinian filmmaker Dima Hamdan made an award-winning short film about this called Blood Like Water. It follows a young gay Palestinian man whose relationship is secret.
I'm sorry for the wrongdoings of past civilizations against you. Yeah, which I mean, is what I'm guessing you're saying. It's like when marginalized people use examples of historic marginalization to justify their own discriminatory, like very violent policies and ideas, which like there is like many situations of, especially when it comes to Black people having like this anti-Blackness that is global, that is its own type of like deep-seated marginalization that we need to call out. But yes, I understand what you were saying. Yeah, where it's like, just because you are marginalized yourself, it doesn't give you the right to weaponize this marginalization. Like how there are many people who are the mouthpieces and tokens of these deeply like fascist enterprises and policies, but don't want to acknowledge that they will be spent as tokens are.
Recorded by an Israeli officer. The officer then threatens to expose him unless he agrees to collaborate and provide information. This isn't just a fictional story though. Hamdan spent more than 2 years researching this issue, speaking with Palestinians and their families who this has happened to. Similar allegations have also been documented by journalists, human rights researchers, and former Israeli intelligence personnel for years. This is a tactic they use called pinkwashing, using LGBTQ rights to market Israel as progressive and Western. During her acceptance speech for the Iris Prize, Hamdan challenged that idea.
There is no pride when gay Palestinian men are blackmailed and oppressed.
So yes, Israeli pride celebrations certainly exist, but why? What are they being used to distract from? What do you think? Let me know in the comments and follow for more like this. Every June, Israel promotes itself as a champion of LGBTQ rights. So let's talk about.
Yep, so as we are talking about, yes, this idea of soldiers saying that, like, don't say this is in the name of, like, look at all of this devastation and like human atrocity and death that is behind him. Like, don't say this is in our name, bitch, because like you can't speak on behalf of all queer people. Like, shut up. Okay, I did want to show this video before we get into the reading. From PhilosophyTube. Once again, we'll be watching this as at a higher speed. You're talking about trying to raise civilizations. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's like there's no comparing, like there's no comparison to this concept where like, oh, you are using this particular instance of marginalization and being like, oh, feel bad for me, and then not expecting it to come back to you as well, which is why we have to look at like liberation as a collective struggle. And that like when some human beings are oppressed, that we all are oppressed, because otherwise we are buying into these systems that are actually exploiting everyone, but they are hurting some people more than others, and that they try to condition us to believe that this is natural rather than confronting the fact that like we're all equal human beings who deserve have uh to have like happy, satisfied, fulfilling lives, that we are not actually being oppressed. Okay, so this is Philosophy Tube, and this is part 2 of the Marx series, Capitalism's Consequences. And of course, this is ever relevant. Though I think I do need to refresh this. I'm getting better at remembering to do this.
March is my month of Marx. In part 1, we learned about labour and class conflict. In this part 2, we'll be looking at capitalism's consequences, vis-a-vis alienation. As well as being a generally bad time for anybody who worked in a factory, the other thing Victorian England was famous for was machines, automation, and this is going to become very important later in the series. Remember, Marx thought that value comes from labour. A machine, then, for Marx, is like a lump of value because it takes labour to build one. As the machine functions and wears down, it transfers some of its value to the products it makes. But only labour power can actually generate new value. Machines just store value and then distribute it really quickly. That's why although automation can increase productivity, the products themselves contain less and less labour and therefore are worth less and less. So in the long run, automation should cause profits to fall. Marx thought. Anyway, like the labour theory of value, the tendency of the rate of profit to fall is pretty controversial. Part of the reason it's controversial is that capitalism does have safety measures against falling profits, most of which try to drive a wedge between the product's value and the price that you sell it for. So for instance, marking up the price so that it doesn't reflect how much labour it actually took to make the product. Or you could cut wages, or you could outsource to a foreign country to reduce labour costs.
Yeah, and also eliminating any sort of information that is talking about the amount of labor that goes into a particular product, not just the price itself, but like censoring that kind of information as well. I guess we became too soft. Thousands of years of wars and colonization. We're trying to live in a civilized, yeah, which is this like Western idea that is inherently anti-indigenous, anti-black, talking about like what is considered civilization or not. It usually is meaning surrounded by this idea of whiteness and white supremacy. We've been doing pretty well since the damn world wars. France and Germany are friends now. We became so lovingly and open. We're not prepared for the horrors. I agree. I think there is this idea. I think a lot of that has to do with even more industrialization and co-opting of media, entertainment, and communication channels, that it gives this idea that like as long as we are like protesting in like polite ways, which usually are just like state sanctioned, that it's like of course these are aspects that aren't going to really move the needle in a substantial, more revolutionary manner, because they are not challenging the system. The system is like, oh, this is what we view as admissible, so this is what you can do. Of course, that's not going to effectively evoke change that creates more equality for everyone when like the systems themselves are creating inordinate amounts of inequality. But we have to be. Yeah, I agree. Which is why I think it's like so important that we are even talking about all of this shit, because it just goes to show how little this actually happens, or at least in a way that people can have a conversation that is not just everyone trying to agree with one another. That like I'm very much an advocate for of like people should be developing their own opinions. And this doesn't mean just agreeing with whoever you are listening to. It actually means listening to what people are saying, reading, doing your own research, taking in information, processing it, and deciding for yourself what you agree with and what you don't know, trying to figure that out, and then trying to learn more about that. You can go live in Germany and work without even showing your ID. Go to the hospital for an operation without showing an ID. Yeah, I mean, that's certainly not a thing in the US, but I don't think there has been that type of, like, and where we will get into the reading of, like, the co-opting of, like, the bourgeois, like, after World War II, and saying, like, oh, we will give these concessions and say, like, we'll give you some things so that you don't rebel too much. And, that you are satisfied with certain things. But that also means that, no, you don't understand. Yeah, exactly. Zero personal experience with that. But also it just goes to show, like, how deeply propagandized and oppressed at large the American people are, with having a sense of, like, oh, it could be slightly better than this. But this is why many people, especially like capitalist forces, people in the 1%, were really fighting against, and still are, any sort of like elected officials who may come in and institute more socialist policies, like a Zoran Mamdani, because then they are seeing, like, oh, if we have less wealth disparities and gaps, like less of this huge difference between viewing what human dignity actually means and who deserves it, that it pisses people off. Like how we mentioned in like the introduction to like this particular edition that I have, that a lot of the time revolutions happen right when they see like some things get slightly better, and that like the European powers, what you have seen is like things got quite a bit better in many aspects, and that has largely kept people under the illusion that there isn't anything wrong. There is some hope. No, you're making really great points, especially with like 9 drinks. That's really impressive, I have to say. I mean, I will be the first to admit, I'm like, I still have like a shit ton to learn, especially with like, I think us all having a pretty abysmal education when it comes to world affairs. But also, like, thank you for being willing to even share your knowledge and be here and like have a conversation about things. I don't have like much hope in human nature or like a whole lot of things changing, but at least in the things that like I have seen personally, is that like the things that actually make it so people, like, you can have your mind change, or like how my mind has been changed over time, is like talking to people, like getting to know people, like having various experiences that like expose you to a diversity of thought and experience in general, but also like reading and like being introduced to like different cultures and stories, and like how that, like, if you can actually develop a sense of like, oh, we actually have more in common, like there, that goes a long way in deconstructing a lot of these systems that say that we're like inherently very different. I hope we all spend time just learning instead of fighting. Yeah, exactly. That's like why they try to censor us all so much. My autism doesn't allow me to see danger. I think I can be the same way. I also think like I just like am easily bruised, or I don't know what this says about, yeah, like an upbringing or whatever. Like I've always like just been like, what is this? And I like forget and just keep going on my day. But there you go. Yeah, learning never ends. It's like that's the hope. that we can all understand that fact, and that, like, if we are all trying to, like, continue to learn and, like, do better, like, that you don't ever reach an end point, and the people who think they have are insufferable and perpetuate a lot of harm.
Also see monopolies or price fixing. And when those safety measures fail, profits fall too low and you get an economic crisis.
So
Marx
thank you
thought
for
that
being
crises
willing
were
to
inevitable under
share your
capitalism. They were
knowledge
actually
and
built into the system.
converse.
He also thought that eventually the safety measures would fail permanently and capitalism would collapse into socialism. More on that in part 4. The common theme of Marx's objections to capitalism is that it has no built-in brakes. Under capitalism, humans won't ever reach a point at which we hardly need to work anymore because most of the jobs are done by machines. Because if nobody's labouring, nobody's generating any profits. And if certain capitalist industries are destroying the environment or killing the workers, well then as long as they're profitable, ain't no brakes on the capitalism train. The system would have to be changed from outside, like the Victorian factory conditions, which were improved, but not by anything within capitalism, by government legislation. That's why Marx put so much importance on a revolution of the working class. He thought it would be an outside shock to a system that couldn't change on its own. As we'll be seeing later in the series, he may have underestimated capitalism's ability to adapt. But whether profits really do fall, or whether the safety measures are enough to keep them bumped up, Marx thought that the Industrial Revolution should have meant people being set free, because you don't need to work as much anymore when you've got machines to do the jobs for you. But because those machines were being used to maximize profit rather than reduce labor, people were actually working harder than ever. Marx thought that under capitalism, the potential of automation gets wasted, and instead of liberation, we get alienation. Alienation refers both to a socio-economic/political state of living, but also potentially a psychological state of unfulfillment. The Encyclopedia of Marxism calls it the process whereby people become foreign to the world they are living in. Remember last time the importance Marx placed on labour? Human labour is very important for him, because we do it consciously.
Industrialization,
And the products
especially,
we make are the reification of a state of mind.
of the
Human
digital
labour for Marx is
age
an expression of what
creates
makes us special,
enormous
that rational and creative
alienation.
impulse to take what nature gives us and build on it. Marx didn't think that there's such a thing as a fixed human nature, independent of our socio-historical circumstances, but he did observe that the desire to labour cooperatively is common to all human societies. He called this our Gattungswesen, or species essence, and he thought that under capitalism that species essence gets corrupted and turned against us through the processes he called
That
alienation.
pronunciation.
Marx identified 4 kinds of alienation that arise under capitalism. The first is the alienation of labourers from the products they make. This occurs when labourers make products that don't fully belong to them. So for instance, you might work in a clothing factory but be unable to afford to wear any of the nice designer clothing that you're making. This occurs because labourers are paid less than the value of what they make. As we said last time, the surplus value is channeled away from them and passed on up to the capitalists. The second type is the alienation of labourers from the act of labouring. This occurs when labourers are coerced or forced or not working on their own terms. They're not working because working is the expression of some need, but because it's a means to getting what they need through attaining wages. It also occurs when they can't decide how the product is sold or applied. So for instance, if you have to work a job that you don't like, making money for somebody else, or starve, Marx thought what you're experiencing there is alienation from the act of labouring. The third is alienation of labourers from other labourers. Marx thought that under capitalism, labourers would be encouraged to seek what benefits them individually, wages, rather than what benefits them mutually, which might be much larger social change. Hence the famous slogan, workers of the world unite. One Western example of this might be the way that some sectors of the white working class have historically viewed working class immigrants, not as people in the same boat as them struggling to make ends meet, possible allies in a fight for social change, but as competition for employment, which is what capitalism makes us. The fourth kind is the alienation of labourers from their Gattungswesen, their species essence. And this goes back to what Marx...
Instead of collective liberation, this is why we had the rise of segregated unions as well.
Human labour was for. Under capitalism, you work to generate profit for somebody else, or you starve, rather than work to generate surplus value for yourself. You do discrete, separate jobs, rather than work on what you want to, because that's the way profits are more easily generated. You do this for hours not set by you, and for most of the time that makes up your life, rather than direct your life the way you want it to go. You produce value, but you're prevented from sharing in it. Marx thought that just wasn't what a good human life is. But isn't all of Marx's whining about the evils of capitalism just misguided? I mean, it's not like under feudalism everybody was happy and nobody worked. You start to work or starve then, and even if we automated as many jobs as we could, there are some jobs that are still going to have to be done by people. Well, we're going to touch on a few of those questions in part 4, Beyond Capitalism. That's the end of part 2. You've learned about capitalism's problems, including alienation. In part 3, we'll take a little bit of a holiday from the dense theory and learn about cultural Marxism. If you'd like to know more about how alienation works, I wrote an article on it for Novara Media that you can find a link to below. It applies Marxist alienation
very
theory
cool.
to the business of being a YouTuber.
I think Novara Media has some really great content.
Speaking of economic struggles, I have a Patreon page. If you would like to support me giving away free education on the internet, kind of education that you might normally have to pay for at a university, then please do feel free to chuck a few dollars my way. I'd really appreciate it.
All right. I mean, also speaking of economic struggles, if you are interested in supporting, subscribing, gifting subscribers helps a lot. My own Patreon is helpful. But no pressure, as people are experiencing their own economic struggles. Just throwing that out there. I live with my Diluvian 80-plus old mother. She's a fascist. I've heard her remarks during the news. Castilian grandma. That's just about love her family. But not about, like, extending it to other people as much. That doesn't make her less obnoxious. Probably histrionic narcissist. Well, I think I'd for sure have family members, a couple in particular, of undiagnosed NPD. I learned to live with my enemies, and we should all. Yeah, I mean, it is difficult, though, like, as we're even talking about, like, family members of, like, if you are not, like, accepted in certain ways, like, how you're saying, like, she, like, loves family, like, there are some people that do not do that. And that it's okay to cut ties with people if they keep hurting you over and over again, just so that you are not, like, especially growing up in Utah, there tends to be this idea of, like, family comes first with everything. And it's like, well, what if there are some, like, deeply harmful things that are happening? Like, at what point, like, do you keep putting yourself in situations that can be harmful to you? Competition instead of collaboration. 80% of the people, I would say, it's people that I would prefer to collaborate than compete. Yeah, it's like we have a lot more in common, but especially when it comes to, like, people who are just and like I've said before, people will probably be mad at me for this, of, like, who are intent on following, like, any particular ideology to the end of days without questioning it substantially, opens themselves up to being manipulated instead of questioning what is going on, especially as there are different people that get into positions of power that should be questioned. My Twitch subscriptions are broken. Yeah, I mean, there's no pressure. I can also, like, be a little shy about bringing that stuff up. It's like I am very aware that people also have their own shit going on. Yeah, that's okay. No worries. Yeah, I just throw it out when it comes up. Yeah, that's okay. Okay, shall we get into the reading? So we are on Section 2, Proletarians and Communists. All right. So we just finished the section bourgeois and proletarians. So now that we have set the scene and talking about all of these various hierarchies and establishing who is gaining power from what, mainly capitalists getting power from our wages and workers. So hope it is not Armand again. No, it is not, in fact. Yeah, that's okay. And I also do not take any sort of, like, personal offense. I know people have their own shit going on. Yes, so we're reading the Communist Manifesto. This is extremely different from the Scarlet Pimpernel. Certainly not Armand, who also was a traitor to the revolutionary cause. But I think it was an interesting exercise in theory to go through the Scarlet Pimpernel and deconstruct it, but I am not going to put myself or put you all through that. Again, that was such a shit show to have to read. So yes. Actually, engaging with more substance. I'll miss Armand. His curls in the wind. He and his sister engaging in barely veiled incestuous affection. Okay, so this is Section 2, Proletarians and Communists. In what relation do the communists stand to the proletarians as a whole? The communists are no separate party distinct from other working class parties. They have no interests separate from the interests of the proletariat in general. They set up no sectarian principles on which they wish to model the proletarian movement. The communists are only distinguished from other proletarian parties by this, that in the different national struggles of the proletarians, they point out and bring to the fore the common interests of the proletariat independent of nationality. And as we were talking about nationalism yesterday specifically, and how it has historically been used for liberation movements, that's a great thing. But once again, that it has been co-opted and by many nefarious actors, and that borders themselves are an idea of some people belonging in a certain place and others not, in order to impose control and dominance. And again, that in the different evolutionary stages which the struggle between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie must pass through, they represent always the interests of the movement as a whole. Thus, the communists are practically the most progressive and resolute section of the working class of all countries. They have, theoretically, the advantage over the great mass of the proletariat of understanding the conditions and general results of the proletarian movement. And I think especially since, this came out, there are even more, there are further leftist movements that have come about, especially as we are seeing these intersections of marginalization and intersections of ideas of liberation. And it is building on this particular theory, but also coming at it from a more decolonized lens. The immediate aim of the communists is the same as that of all other proletarian parties: organization of the proletariat on a class basis, overthrow of the supremacy of the bourgeois, conquest of political power by the proletariat. The theoretical propositions of the communists in no way rest upon ideas or principles invented or discovered by this or that universal reformer. They are but the general expression of actual conditions of an existing class struggle, of a historical movement going on under our own eyes. The abolition of hitherto existing property relations is not a distinctive feature of communism. All property relations have undergone continual historic change, corresponding to the change in historic social conditions. The French Revolution, for example, as we were just reading about, from a deeply aristocratic lens, abolished feudal property in favor of bourgeois property. Thus, the distinctive feature of communism is not the abolition of property in general, but the abolition of bourgeois property. But modern bourgeois private property is the final and most perfect expression of the system of producing and appropriating products based on class antagonism, on the exploitation of one by another. In this sense, the communists can condense their theory into one sentence: abolition of private property. We communists have been reproached with wishing to abolish personal property acquired by labor, property which is alleged to be the foundation of all personal freedom, activity, and independence. Hard-won, self-earned, self-acquired property. Do you mean the property of the small tradesman and peasant, which preceded the bourgeois form of property? We have no need to abolish that. The development of industry has abolished and is abolishing it daily. So that is a very big distinction that I think many people, when they hear the abolishment of private property, they immediately go but what about I can't own anything? That's no, that's not what it's talking about. It's really talking about how we are all indebted. If you think about when it comes to owning things, especially when it comes to moortgages and how actually the bank owns it until you pay it off, which many people do not even in their lifetimes, or they barely do. So did you own it, or did the bank own it for that entire time? Or do you mean modern bourgeois private property? Does wage labor, the labor of the proletarian, create any property for him? Not at all. It creates capital, i.e., the property which exploits wage labor, and which can increase only by producing a new supply of wage labor for further exploitation. Property, in its present form, is based on the antagonism of capital and wage labor. Let us examine both sides of that antagonism. To be a capitalist is to have not only a mere personal, but a social position in production. Yes. So it's actually a type of designation. Capital is a collective product and can only be set in motion by the united action of many members of society, and even, in the last resort, of the united action of all its members. Thus, capital is not a personal, but a social power. When, therefore, capital is converted into common property belonging to all members of society, personal property is not thereby converted into social property. It is only the social character of the property that is changed. It loses its class character. We come now to wage labor. The average price of wage labor is the minimum wage, i.e., the sum of the necessaries of life absolutely needful to keep the worker in life as a worker. And as we are seeing this return to feudalism, with all of our material conditions deteriorating, that wages not actually keeping up with the necessities that it means to exist and be alive, that this is becoming not even a thing, which also is showing how deeply we are into this feudal state. I should really share with you this orchestra of women, Zensky, Pevsky, Zabor, Kabinat, who sings leftist songs in all language. Ooh, that's cool. Are they Polish? I'm going to save this. Thank you. I'm going to show this for Culture Corner. Slovenian. Okay, I'm just going to save this real quick. Thank you very much. I love this. Any type of culture we can highlight that is not dictated by the capitalists. Very good. He sings leftist songs in all languages. Amiable. Yes, I did understand. If you have a music channel in the Discord, I'll go there. I think, do I have... Oh, I think I do have a channel that's Art as Revolution, or is Revolution. You should submit it there if you're interested. Also, if you're interested in joining the Discord. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'll go over this on Friday. We by no means wish to abolish this personal appropriation of the product of labor, an appropriation indispensable to the maintenance and reproduction of human life, an appropriation leaving no surplus which could give power over the labor of others. We wish only to suppress the miserable character of this appropriation, by which the worker only lives in order to increase capital, and only lives so long as the interests of the ruling class demand it. In bourgeois society, living labor is but a means of increasing accumulated labor. In communist society, accumulated labor is but a means of enlarging, enriching, and promoting the existence of the laborer. Thus, in bourgeois society, the past dominates the present. In communist society, the present dominates the past. In bourgeois society, capital is independent and personal, whilst the living individual is dependent and deprived of personality. And also meaning like personhood. And the bourgeoisie calls the abolition of this state of things the abolition of individuality and freedom. And this is also like very American in many ways to be like, it's all about the individual. That's like, is it? Because it seems like it's only about certain individuals. Yeah, I'm there. Okay, cool. This shows I'm not always consistent at checking the Discord. Sorry. I'm needing to be better at that. I will admit this. And the bourgeoisie calls the abolition... Oh, wait. I already said that. And with reason. It certainly means the abolition of bourgeois individuality, independence, and freedom. By freedom, under the present bourgeois conditions of production, is meant free trade, free buying and selling. For some. For them. But if trade disappears, free trade disappears also. All the talk of free trade, like all the rest of the freedom bravado of our bourgeoisie, has meaning only by contrast with restricted trade, by contrast with the fettered burghers of the Middle Ages, but none which contrasted with the communistic abolition of trade, bourgeois conditions of production, and the bourgeoisie itself. You are horrified because we would abolish private property, but in your existing society, private property is already abolished for 9/10 of the population. The essential for its existence is that it shall not exist for these 9/10. Thus, you reproach us with desiring to abolish a form of property, the necessary condition of whose existence is that the great majority of society shall be entirely propertyless. In one word, you reproach us because we would abolish your property. Precisely so. That is our intention. Badass. From the moment when labor can no longer be converted into capital, money, rent, briefly into a social power capable of being monopolized, i.e., from the moment when individual property can no longer be converted into bourgeois property, into capital, from that moment, you declare the individual is suppressed. You confess, therefore, and so this is directly addressing the bourgeois. You confess, therefore, that by individual you merely mean bourgeois, the bourgeois owner of property, and this individual must certainly be abolished. Communism deprives none of the power to appropriate his social product. It only deprives him of the power to subjugate the labor of others by this appropriation. It has been objected that upon the abolition of private property, all activity will cease and society will be plunged into universal laziness. Oh no! Despite the people controlling things being the laziest of us all because they don't work. By nature, not by nature, by class. The definition of that class. If that were so, bourgeois society would have been ruined long since by idleness. Yeah. For those who work therein gain nothing, and those who gain do not work. The whole objection merely expresses the tautology that there can be no more wage labor so soon as there is no more capital. All objections urged against the communistic mode of production and appropriation of the material product have equally been urged against its mode of producing and appropriating intellectual products. Just as for the bourgeoisie, the disappearance of class property is the disappearance of production itself, so for him, the disappearance of class culture means the disappearance of culture altogether. That culture, and it can't control culture as well, because it's a commodity to the bourgeoisie. That culture, whose loss he deplores, is for the enormous majority merely a culture towards functioning as a machine. But do not dispute with us so long as you apply to the abolition of bourgeois property the standard of your bourgeois ideas of freedom, culture, justice, etc. Your very ideas themselves are but products of bourgeois conditions of production and property, as your justice is but the will of your class uplifted into law. A will whose character is determined by the material conditions of existence of your class. Material conditions, this is a phrase, that is very apt in describing what we all experience and how to actually improve what we are experiencing and how we measure it. You share with every previous ruling class the interested conception which causes you to transform into eternal laws of nature and reason the social relations which result from your historically changing relations of production and property. What you perceive in the case of ancient property, what you perceive in the case of feudal property, you dare not admit in the case of bourgeois property. Abolition of the family? Even the most radical are enraged by this scandalous proposal of the communists. On what is the present family, the bourgeois family, based? On capital, on private gain? Also, this is calling out directly this aspect of inheritance, of aristocracy, of how it is all about family and a purity of bloodlines, rather than actually having a more communal idea of collective experience. On capital, on private gain, In its fully developed form, it exists only for the bourgeoisie, but it finds the complement in the destruction of family life for the proletariat and in public prostitution. Yeah, and we see that with so many different types of, like, how this capitalist system is built to begin with inheritance, taxes, and like how all of these people are able to circumvent these systems that the oppressed, the proletariat, experiences because they benefit from the system. It is built for them, and that this is what continues this aspect of generational wealth. I'm working on the links as I heard you tell me about the superstructure and its perks, which I well know. The fault is from the old Roman patricians, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I mean, they certainly contributed to all of this. The bourgeois family vanishes naturally when its complement vanishes, and both disappear with the disappearance of capital. Do you reproach us with wishing to stop the exploitation of children by their parents? We confess to this crime. But you say we would destroy the most sacred of relations by replacing home education by social. Again, like talking about, like, even homeschooling, home education, actually, is a way to keep many people in ideologies that are inherently oppressive and not actually have them be exposed to diverse human beings, people who are different from them. And is not your education conditioned by society, by the social conditions under which you educate, by direct or indirect social intervention, by means of schools, etc.? The communists have not invented this interference of society in education. They would merely alter its character and rescue education from the influence of the ruling class. The bourgeois declamations about the family and education, about the sacred relations of parents and children, become all the more disgusting as the development of modern industry tears asunder all family ties for the proletarians and transforms their children into mere commodities and instruments of labor. Yes, so family for some, meaning the 1%, the ruling class, bourgeois society, not for everyone else. But you communists would introduce community of women, shrieks the whole bourgeoisie in chorus. The bourgeois sees in his wife a mere instrument of production. Yeah, that is true. So we're actually getting more of a feminist centering here. It doesn't go far enough to actually be considered like truly the vehicle for liberation, like in talking about like not centering patriarchy. But a very great distinction, especially for the time. He hears that the instruments of production are to become common property, and naturally can only think that the lot of becoming common property will likewise fall to women. He never suspects that the real point aimed at it is to do away with the position of women as mere instruments of production, like literal instruments of production, of producing human beings, who are subservient to male dominance. For the rest, nothing is more ridiculous than the virtuous horror of our bourgeois at the community of women which he pretends will be officially established by the communists. The communists have no need to introduce community of women, it has nearly always existed. Yeah. The members of our bourgeoisie, not content with having the wives and daughters of their proletarians at their disposal, not to speak of official prostitution, take special delight in mutually seducing each other's wives. Bourgeois marriage is in reality community of wives. The communists could at most be accused of wishing to replace a hypocritical and concealed community of women by an official and open community of women. For the rest, it is evident that with the abolition of the present system of production will disappear also the community of women resulting from it, i.e., public prostitution. The communists are further accused of wishing to abolish countries and national spirit. So engaging with this argument that we were talking about yesterday, or this idea of nationalism and its drawbacks. The workers have no country. What they have not got cannot be taken from them. Since the proletariat must first conquer political power, must rise to be the dominant class of the nation, must constitute itself as the nation, it is so far national itself. Did I just skip something? Oh no. It is so far national itself, though not at all in the bourgeois sense. National differences and antagonisms are today vanishing ever more and more with the development of the bourgeoisie, free trade, and the world market, the uniformity of industrial production, and the conditions of life corresponding thereto. With the victory of the proletariat, they will vanish still faster. United action, of civilized countries at least, is one of the first conditions of the emancipation of the workers. So it's also talking about, like we've said before, what it's defining as being civilized, that often it can be perceived as this like Eurocentric Western colonial idea. And this does have some sense of awareness of decolonization, but still having it not necessarily be talked about from this aspect of like returning land to indigenous people and actually acknowledging more about the extraction of resources. Decolonize the industry. Yeah, exactly. Why we need to continually be talking about having a decolonizing lens, even when reading stuff like this, because it doesn't go far enough. In the same measures as the exploitation of one individual by another is ended, the exploitation of one nation by another will be ended also. With the disappearance of classes within the nation, the state of enmity between nations will come to an end. The accusations, so like this idea of like, oh, this country and this country, we have to fight them because they stand for this. It's like, okay, well, have we ever considered that like the only people benefiting from this situation are the people who are controlling the countries, who are controlling the wars that are going on between these countries? Oh, you're listening to the music? Love. I'm excited to listen to it. With the disappearances... Yes. With the disappearance of classes within the nation, the state of enmity between nations will come to an end. The accusations which are made against communism from a religious, philosophical, and generally ideological standpoint deserve no serious examination. Does it require deep insight to understand that with changes in man's material conditions of life, social relations, and social system, his ideas, views, and conceptions, in one word, his consciousness, also changes? What does the history of ideas prove but that intellectual production changes with material production? The ruling ideas of any particular age have ever been only the ideas of its ruling class. Who actually has access to writing, being thought of as like a philosopher and a thinker who has the chance to learn how to read and to make their ideas heard on a larger scale. When people speak of ideas that revolutionize society, the fact is merely expressed that within the old society the elements of the new are formed, that the dissolution of the old ideas keep pace within the dissolution of the old social relations. When the ancient world was in its decline, the ancient religions were overcome by the Christian religion. When in the 18th century, Christian ideas gave place to rationalist ideas, feudal society fought its death battle with the then revolutionary bourgeoisie. The ideas, so again, talking about like justifying, using religion to oppress people and institute, have this be used as a way for mind control and implementing it within these nation states as policies and justify colonization. The ideas of religious liberty and liberty of conscience merely express the rule of free competition within the domain of knowledge. Undoubtedly, it will be said, religious, moral, philosophical, political, and juridical ideas have been modified in the course of historical development, but amid these changes, religion, morals, philosophy, politics, and law remained. There are, moreover, eternal truths such as freedom, justice, etc., which are common to all social systems. But communism abolishes these eternal truths. It abolishes religion and morality instead of constituting them on a new basis, which is contrary to all past historical development. What does this accusation amount to? The history of all past society is the history of class antagonisms, which took different forms in different epochs. But whatever form they may have taken, the exploitation of one section of society by another is a fact common to all previous centuries. No wonder, then, that the social consciousness of all centuries, despite multiplicity and diversity, always moved in certain common forms in lines of thought which can only completely vanish with the entire disappearance of class antagonism. The communist revolution is the most radical rupture with traditional property relations. No wonder that in the course of its development, it breaks most radically with traditional ideas. But let us leave bourgeois objections to communism. We have already seen that the first step in the working class revolution is the raising of the proletariat to the position of the ruling class, the victory of democracy. Yes, so, working class revolution, talking about that as a step in obtaining this means of liberation, that there are many people that think, like, as long as people are elevated to this to the strata of the ruling class of, like, essentially buying in, that is what liberation means and what equality means, as opposed to breaking things down. The proletariat will use its political power to wrest by degrees all capital from the bourgeoisie, to centralize all instruments of production in the hands of the state, i.e., of the proletariat organized as the ruling class, and to increase as rapidly as possible the total mass of productive forces. So this also is where you have, like, anarchist thought come into play in saying that, like, sometimes, like, people don't, if we are wanting liberation now, that we do not have the time to if we are wanting people to not be suffering now, we don't have time to be engaging in these types of tactics in order to gain power within the system that is inherently built to oppress us. This naturally cannot be accomplished at first except by despotic inroads on the rights of property and on the bourgeois conditions of production. By measures, therefore, which appear economically insufficient and untenable, but which in the course of the movement outstrip themselves and are indispensable as means of revolutionizing the whole mode of production. These measures will naturally be different in different countries. Nevertheless, the most advanced countries, the following will be, for the most advanced countries, which, like, what does that mean? Just, like, in terms of having more of a chance of, like, buying into the system, like, perhaps being in more, like, socialist countries. The following will be pretty generally applicable. 1. Abolition of property in land and confiscation of ground rents to the state. 2. A heavily progressive income tax. 3. Abolition of inheritance. 4. Confiscation of the property of emigrants and rebels. 5. Centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. 6. Centralization of the means of transport in the hands of the state. 7. Extension of national factories and instruments of production, cultivation, and improvement of wastelands in accordance with a general social plan. 8. Obligation of all to labor, organization of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. 9. Combination of agricultural and industrial labor in order to remove the distinction between town and country. 10. Free public education for all children. Abolition of factory labor for children in its present form. Combination of education with material production, etc. And so, of course, this is going, talking about this idea of, like, once you have enough people who are from the proletariat class, able to actually access these means and implement these types of policies, that that is where there are more, like, state-run entities that are viewed as a good. But also, we have to constantly call into question, like, who is being put into power and how this can still be, like, when things are centralized, that they can be a means for people who are willing to co-opt movements and ideology and use them for their own personal gain, or to gain power in a way that directly gives them more like authoritarian power. So there is, like, that argument against more of, like, a systemic of state-run entities that they can still be open to corruption. When in the course of development class distinctions have disappeared and all production is concentrated in the hands of associated individuals, the public power will lose its political character. Political power, properly speaking, is the organized power of one class for the purpose of oppressing another. If the proletariat, forced in its struggle against the bourgeoisie to organize as a class, makes itself by a revolution the ruling class, and as the ruling class destroys by force the old conditions of property, it destroys along with these conditions of production the conditions of existence of class antagonism, classes in general, and therewith its own domination as a class. In the place of the old bourgeois society, with its classes and class antagonisms, an association appears in which the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. Anyway, that is that section. We will read section 2, Socialist and Communist Literature. Not 2, 3 after this. And then, is this the last section, I believe? Yeah, I think so. And then we'll get into, this address of the Central Committee to the Communist League of March 1850. We'll get into that after. So, okay. That'll be it for today. Tomorrow, we will have Banned Book Club. We'll finish up with some of the national news, what's happening within more local news, of like what's happening in Utah, where I'm located. But we are reading this section. Here's the house. Here is the house. House, it is green and white. It has a red door. It is very pretty, very pretty, very, very pretty. And this section goes from page, in this edition at least, of The Bluest Eye, 33 to 38. So it's a little bit shorter, but I also am wanting to go over more of like interviews with Toni Morrison, more analyses of the book itself from various creators and smart people who are able to provide a lot of really great insight to this book. So it may not be full of as much discussion or quite as much analysis, with the section not being as long, but I think, at least for me, analysis for me, and I think that's great. You don't need to be hearing from me quite as much, probably. Anyway, that'll be it for today, but thank you very much for being here. I hope you have a good rest of your day, evening, and I will see you soon. Okay, bye.